Big Hilton. We've just started our celebration summit, first ever, the National Mayor's Summit on City Design. The Mayor of Philadelphia, the one and only, Mike Nutter. How do you feel, Mayor? What do you think about Mr. Main's speech? I mean, my God.
That was an incredible presentation. I know he had to really kind of consolidate all the information that he had, but those first images, especially on the, I think it's LA Now,
right?
With all of that data, the overlay and the interplay with all of those components. I was sitting there thinking I'd love to have something like that myself.
Well, I think we need to hear more of him, and of course, a special moment for Mayor Daley greeting us here.
Yeah. Well, Chicago is what it is in many, many ways because of Mayor Daley. He has been a mayor to the mayors in many cases, and I've had some enjoyable conversations with him. He's generous with his time. He's generous with his people. If he has an idea, if he has something to share, it's yours. And but he's just been such a great leader and very, very focused. I admire him tremendously, and I don't know what he's going to do next, but certainly I'm still going to call him.
We appreciate you being here, and we're looking forward to the lunch today, this afternoon working sessions, and also tomorrow. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Mayor Michael Nutter from Philadelphia. As viewers know, you're going to be our president soon, in June in Baltimore. You'll be our president, and I think we believe that the design thing is not about celebrating the past, it's the future. So I know with your leadership, we can integrate more of this into our other initiatives.
But you know, I think what you see a lot, the thread that goes through the reclaiming of our cities is that they capture the past, they connect it to the present, and take it to the future.
That's beautiful.
That really is the opportunities that come with design. It takes a place and its assets, even assets that you don't necessarily see, you know, at first glance, and make them a foundation for recreating the city.
Beautiful. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa from Los Angeles here in downtown Chicago. Thank you very much. This is a great summit we're having. It's amazing, 25 years right here in Chicago. How do you feel about this? How do you feel this morning?
Oh, I thought this morning was fabulous. And what a great venue for us to be here in Chicago, what a great place. Look around this building and you see art, design, which is what we're here to do. And to also talk about the economic impacts of art and design in regards to our cities. And Chicago, what a better place for us to talk about design when all of the work that Mayor Daley has done to really bring art and design as the focal point of his legacy.
And this is a celebration of 25 years, but as we both say, it's a beginning. So this meeting is going to be historic, but we're going to go forward to the future. Thank you for being a part of our 25 years celebrating the Mayor's Institute of City Design. Mayor Elizabeth Couch from Burnsville, Minnesota.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Mayor James Brainerd from Carmel, Indiana, who has just opened up an incredible performing arts center in his city. I was there in January, and thanks. I know you're busy. How do you feel the meeting is going so far?
The meeting's going very well, and it's great to see people.
A great city, large or small, is defined by the quality of its public realm. The design of the public spaces. They enrich the city and the citizens. They make it a greater place to live. They make it a greater economic success.
At the end of the day, you want to be able to say, I can look back on having left a mark on making my community a better place. That's what the Institute allowed me to do. To really say, what could it be if we imagine greatness?
Talking about design, you're talking about the language of problem solving in places. MICD is focused on design, and more of the work of the mayors is related to how they can think of themselves as their city's problem solvers, and design has a major role in that.
You have 9 mayors bring their challenges to the best and the brightest. And I've seen with my own eyes how mayors have changed after they have come back from a design institute.
The Mayor's Institute gives mayors the tools and confidence. When you have professionals give you good feedback, that's dollars. That's currency that you can bring home.
That institute is a reservoir of expertise for mayors to think about the big and small projects they're engaged in when it comes to changing the landscape of their cities.
How you grow a city cannot be in a haphazard fashion or just kind of everyone doing whatever they're doing. Design matters.
It brings an education to you in a matter of 2 or 3 days that you just can't get anywhere else.
It helps you to realize that you can do more than you thought you could.
When I went back and my staff asked me, so how was it? And my response was, you know, I feel like my head exploded. You know, I was like, wow, it's incredible. Mayors work very hard on budgetary matters and political matters every day. The decision a mayor makes about the design, those decisions will positively impact a city for generations.
50 years from now, people will ride by a park, by a performing arts center, and they will admire it and they will feel good about it, and they will appreciate what that mayor did after a Mayor's Institute on City Design.
Miami 21 is the most important zoning legislation to be passed in this country in perhaps decades.
This was a revamp of the entire city code affecting every neighborhood of the city of Miami. And the political climate was very hard, particularly when you're doing something as dramatic as we did. But the truth is, the craziness that had been developed through multiple amendments of the old code, what that created was a tremendous amount of conflict between neighborhoods and developers. Their quaint, single-family home neighborhood had a 20, 30-story building right next to it. What Miami 21 does now is create that environment where mixed uses can coexist.
Manny, being the student that is, picked up what he learned from the Mayor's Institute and created the comprehensive vision for the future of the city.
There is no question that Miami 21 wouldn't be what it is today, but for my experience with the Institute. The Institute showed me how important a city's design is, and in that discussion, my convictions for Miami 21 became crystallized and maybe even a stronger advocate for what I wanted to accomplish.
The heart of the city is a 54-acre site that was designed to be a mixed-use development, a place where people would come to gather, a place that is an urban setting in a suburban environment.
The heart of the city that you see today was not always the heart of the city.
It was your typical suburban development with different uses that were disconnected. It became old and depressed and blighted.
But many years ago, the community came together and had a vision for something better.
The Performing Arts Center was the biggest controversial piece, and it was part of the package that I brought to the Mayor's Institute.
Facilities like Burnsville's Performing Arts Center do require public commitment, and that was not an easy decision for our local leadership.
The Mayor's Institute played a great part in helping me because I was confident with the feedback that I received from the financing side and the marketing analysis side. We moved forward.
We project the heart of the city will generate $2 to $3 million in property tax compared to the $200,000 that was being collected prior to this redevelopment.
Today, the Burnsville Performing Arts Center stands as a beacon that we are serious about reinvesting in our community. When you have great design, that's art, and you know it has great value.
Long Beach really was a Navy town up until the early 1990s. The Base Closure Commission first acted in 1991 and later acted in 1995. We lost about 58,000 jobs, accounting for well over $2 billion in economic impact. Long Beach really wasn't a nosedive. It was a very tough period of time, but we had to move forward. We had to create a future for ourselves. The redevelopment of downtown has really been built on design principles that we felt would make the downtown interesting, vibrant, sustainable over time. Whether it's the aquarium or the boat harbor, it's the retail, the restaurants, the commercial behind it, and so forth. This panoramic view of the downtown over my shoulder just didn't look the same. It's really a public place now where people like to come with their families.
I was born and raised in the city of Long Beach, and quitting wasn't an option. My project was the downtown area of our city, and I came away inspired from the discussions that we had at the Mayor's Institute. The Mayor's Institute gave me confidence, and when I came back, I talked with more authority because I had found so many things that were helpful to so many cities that we could replicate.
What happened downtown really was a catalyst for development activity throughout the entire city, and I think you're seeing greater energy and excitement throughout the community.
The change in our city has been dramatic. We're very proud of what's happened.
Providence is an incredibly beautiful city. It's a city that respects design. Good design in the development of buildings and public space really matters. One of the great urban celebrations of Providence is Waterfire. Millions of people have come to Providence to see Waterfire and have been really mesmerized by that experience in the center of the downtown. The Mayor's Institute on City Design changed my perspective as mayor, made me understand my responsibilities to be the chief and best designer I could be for my city. It was 3 of the most valuable days of my life as a new mayor because it really taught me to look at plans and proposals and designs in a different way, to evaluate it with a different standard, and to learn and understand the importance of good design in the development of cities.
Our waterfront park is our front doors. People come into the state, they see this beautiful green expanse right on the waterfront. They say, what's going on here? People look at a city and say, this is someplace special.
Before we had this incredible waterfront, they used to have names for Louisville like Rust City or Junk City, because as you came across the bridge, you look at the waterfront and it was just piles and piles of junk.
And it was 85 acres of really unappealing land use.
And the question then was, what do you do?
Reclaiming the river as its front yard is the first thing the waterfront park did. What that has done is created a sort of beloved icon, touted as a place you must visit when you arrive in Louisville.
The Institute played a major role because it gave me the ability to interact, ask the right questions, talk about possibilities. And the Institute made very clear to me, design it in a way that it connects to the people. Turning this waterfront to one of the most beautiful spots in the Commonwealth of Kentucky has had a ripple effect for hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in housing, in entertainment venues, all within walking distance of the park.
Every city have what seem to be insurmountable issues. And so it's important to help people realize that those odds are not insurmountable and that there are great possibilities.
If you ask people where they want to live, it has to do with social offerings, with openness, and with aesthetics. So I think in the future, you're talking about creating places where people want to live, the businesses, the economy will follow.
design and architecture has the power to transform cities and to actually transform people's lives. It's a powerful, powerful tool. All of the issues that we deal with every day in living in cities are affected by design and the design of those cities.
We know and we can see the great success stories throughout America in every region.
I'm very excited about the future of cities. And certainly having the Institute around is going to help lead all of us into a brighter future.
We're downtown Chicago at the Big Hilton. We've just started our celebration summit, first ever, the National Mayor's Summit on City Design. The Mayor of Philadelphia, the one and only, Mike Nutter. How do you feel, Mayor? What do you think about Mr. Main's speech? I mean, my God.
That was an incredible presentation. I know he had to really kind of consolidate all the information that he had, but those first images, especially on the, I think it's LA Now,
right?
With all of that data, the overlay and the interplay with all of those components. I was sitting there thinking I'd love to have something like that myself.
Well, I think we need to hear more of him, and of course, a special moment for Mayor Daley greeting us here.
Yeah. Well, Chicago is what it is in many, many ways because of Mayor Daley. He has been a mayor to the mayors in many cases, and I've had some enjoyable conversations with him. He's generous with his time. He's generous with his people. If he has an idea, if he has something to share, it's yours. And but he's just been such a great leader and very, very focused. I admire him tremendously, and I don't know what he's going to do next, but certainly I'm still going to call him.
We appreciate you being here, and we're looking forward to the lunch today, this afternoon working sessions, and also tomorrow. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Mayor Michael Nutter from Philadelphia. As viewers know, you're going to be our president soon, next in June in Baltimore. You'll be our president, and I think we believe that the design thing is not about celebrating the past, it's the future. So.
Hi, everybody. If you just want to take your seats, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. If we could just get settled, we'll start probably in just 30 seconds. Good morning. That was good. I want to thank you all for catching the red-eye back on the Concorde last night from the royal wedding. I know I do want a full report. It was hard to be here and not be there. I thought that'd be funnier. It must have been a long night for everyone. Gosh. Everybody was up watching the royal wedding. So welcome back to the second day of our working session. We were up very late last night preparing a lot of the material that you gave us yesterday. I want to thank everyone for an incredibly productive day yesterday. I know it was a short amount of time to prepare a lot of information about a lot of big topics. I want to thank three of our scribes that helped us put a lot of this information together, Danny O'Shaughnessy, Christopher Coase, and Catherine Tang. They really were the rock stars last night. Let's give them a big round of applause. They didn't get to come to the receptions. So this morning we have a report out from the forums, and again, I just want to emphasize that this is not a representation of any one organization or any one mayor. It's really just a report out of what we heard yesterday. We tried to sum it up. You may not see every single thing that was said yesterday. We got so much content. We're trying to kind of give you the high level. There will be a report out that we do after this report, after this summit, and where we're going to try to bring more of the information together, so your voice will be heard if you don't see it up here today. After about a 30-minute report out from the wonderful members we have over here, we will have about 30 minutes for people who weren't in one of the other forums, or if you just have something else to say and to add to the conversation. We will have 30 minutes to sort of continue to beef up and talk about what we've been talking about, continue to do some work. So right after that, we didn't have a chance to present those findings to federal officials. We'll start that with a 20-minute speech from Secretary Sean Donovan, who is here. Thank you, Sean, wherever you are. And then we'll go into a panel with other representatives from HUD, DOT, the White House Domestic Policy Council, and the NEA. And following that, we'll have a lunch honoring Mayor Daley and a closing speech by our chairman. Sound good? So we are going to jump right in now to our report out. We're just going to start with Mayor Manny Diaz. Manny Diaz was first elected mayor of Miami in 2001, and in 2008 served as president of the United States Conference of Mayors. Diaz's leadership in Miami was innovative and transformative, and he has received numerous national awards and recognitions for his design leadership. In private life, he remains active in Miami and nationally, among others, sits on the boards of the Bloomberg Family Foundation and UPenn's Institute for Urban Research. Please help me welcome Mayor Manny Diaz.
Thank you, and good morning. Mayors face significant challenges every day: eradicating poverty, providing safety for our residents, providing a quality education for our children, and creating opportunity, economic opportunity for all of our residents. But our roles to make cities sustainable, to make them work, to be the architects of their future, is perhaps more important today than at any time in our history. The single most critical response to help keep our country strong is to embrace smart growth, to design cities that make sense. To that end, transportation design and investment is perhaps the most significant issue facing us today. But cities cannot do it alone. We need a partner in Washington. America's failure to plan and invest in transportation and transit is bad for the American family. Public transportation can yield significant savings to an American family. It's bad for American business, increasing the cost of moving goods and creating annual losses to the bottom line in the hundreds of billions of dollars. It's bad for our environment. Use of public transportation can cut our greenhouse gas emissions by over 30%. It's bad for our health, and it is bad for our continued dependence on foreign oil. Proper planning and investment will propel our economy forward, assure our continued global competitiveness, stimulate job creation, generate tax revenues, and lower the cost of doing business, increase corporate revenues and American exports, and ease the U.S. trade deficit. America's future prosperity, our world economic standing, and our ability to accommodate 120 million more people in the United States by the year 2050 directly depends on rebuilding our infrastructure. America's backbone is broken. Our spinal cord is severed, and we are on the verge of paralysis. That is why we need a national infrastructure Marshall Plan. We need to see our infrastructure as our nation's global nerve center. It is more than just roads, but a giant web of connectivity and mobility. It is about powering our future and sustaining the American way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Diaz. Moving on to Mayor Michael A. Nutter. After nearly 15 years in public service, Michael Nutter was sworn in as the 98th mayor of his hometown of Philadelphia in 2008. Mayor Nutter also enjoyed an accomplished career in public service, business, and financial administration. Currently second vice president to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, he is scheduled to become president following Mayor Villaraigosa. He, too, is a graduate of the Mayor's Institute on City Design and hosted MICD 43 in February of 2009 in Philadelphia. Mayor Nutter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning. I don't know who does the scheduling. I don't know why I was put after Manny Diaz. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. He is so, so great. Let me say two words. Design matters. Design matters. And cities matter also. And picking up on Mayor Diaz, We talk about our federal partnerships, which are growing. They need to be strengthened. There's no question about it. Cities cannot make it, metro areas cannot make it without a strong partner in Washington, recognition of the things that we do, the things that we can accomplish, because mayors have to get things done each and every day. We are, in fact, the chief designers through our planning departments or through our economic development agencies. We see the things that happen on a daily basis. We can utilize resources quicker, faster, and implement projects much better than any other governmental unit anywhere else. Also, the fact of the matter that the federal government does not have a capital budget, that issue must be addressed. You cannot deal with all these infrastructure issues on a wait until it breaks and then we'll fix it basis. The federal government needs a capital budget. And lastly, this partnership not only must be strengthened, but must be clear to cities and metro areas all across the country. And as we have a national foreign policy, we need to better understand what our domestic policy is for cities and metro areas day after day after day. We're in the business of getting things done. We make things happen. We have the infrastructure internally to our governments to spend those dollars, to get them out quickly, put people to work, and beautify our cities. And whether it's reclaiming our park and open space, whether it's revitalizing our waterfronts, our downtown cores, and neighborhoods, this is what we do for a living each and every day. And mayors are focused on these issues. And so we're here in Chicago looking at what a mayor was able to do over a long period of time. And some folks get that amount of time and some don't. But let me say, design matters. And if you let mayors do their job with the proper resources, cutting through red tape, cutting across agencies that are now working together, Department of Transportation, EPA, the Department of Energy, and certainly our great, great friends at HUD. When you unleash the power of the federal government, unrestrict us from regulations and red tape and paperwork, be surprised at what we can do and how quickly we can do it. Cities matter. Design matters also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Nutter. I have to agree. We're now going to move into the direct report outs from the facilitators from the forums, starting with Marilyn Taylor from the Design and Transportation Forum. Marilyn Taylor became the Dean of the School of Design at the University of Philadelphia in 2008 after practicing as an architect and urban designer at Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. I can't believe I messed that name up. Shameful. She is internationally acclaimed for her design of large-scale urban projects and civic initiatives. Marilyn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the first of three reporting out from the three fabulous panels, work sessions that we had yesterday. And I know I speak for all of the facilitators who are going to come up here in saying thank you to the mayors for the time you invested, for the quality of the ideas, for the passion behind them, for the examples, for everything you gave us so that we could put together this presentation, which is a very high-level summary of all of the things that we heard from you. And indeed, if it's hard to follow one mayor, imagine what it feels like to follow two extraordinary mayors. So I will do the best I can at reporting back on all the wonderful things that you told us as we were meeting. We went through opportunities, we went through obstacles, we went through resources, and we came in our panel to a set of recommendations that I'd like to share with you now. The first came directly from Mayor Diaz, reinforced by all of you. It is time to chart a new course. I like the Marshall Plan for Infrastructure and Transportation, a new course for transportation and infrastructure in our country. What do we mean by that? We mean we heard from you, the mayors would like to see a national vision for transportation, backed by a capital plan that will require us to be innovative about reaching to many, many sources, including new and creative ones, to implement what we're doing. The mayors would like to see measurable milestones, clear standards, a path to follow as we move ahead to build America's 21st century transportation and infrastructure. Strong request, level with the American people. Reveal the true costs of transportation so that people in our communities can make real choices based on data, not just on habit. Provide information so the choices are clear, and we, designers, as your partners, Design Matters, want to speak up and help be a part of carrying that message. Shift the thinking from mode to balanced. It isn't whether it's a car or whether it's a bus or whether it's your bike or whether you walk or whether you take the train. It's, are you using the means of travel to get where you're going that is best suited to that trip and does the most for the environment, the economy, and well-being for all of us? So what does that mean? We need to break down the institutional barriers and silos. Stop funding one element of transportation at a time. Think of optimizing the network. Offer the choices and think place-based, not mode-based. In fact, we've all experienced and had success with complete streets. We'd now like to think about complete places. Direct funds to the cities, not to the states. You said it. Cities, of course, for transportation means metropolitan areas and metropolitan regions, but the point here is that local governments have the ability to deliver the infrastructure that we need. They can work well in the context of MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, but we need to set new high criteria for how those metropolitan planning organizations work based on the best practices of those that have been truly successful in bringing vitality to their region. Support and reward innovation. The pilot programs are great. You would like to see more. Yes, you're willing to be held accountable. Give us a set of metrics and we will live up to them, or we will correct what we didn't completely understand and go again. The temporary projects with paint and porch chairs sitting out in pavement to create open space are working. If we collect data, if we understand what truly works. We would like to see an increase in the federal support for the seed money for the planning and design that can make these things happen so we can learn well from each other. And of course, you said, and we all believe, small projects. You don't have to spend a lot of money to do well. Small projects can have very big and very positive impacts. We need to integrate across the board, as Marion Weiss and Michael Manfredi's absolutely fantastic sculpture park, Olympic Sculpture Park in Seattle, dealt with a train, a freight line, a highway, and a waterfront, pulling them all together. What does that mean? That means design thinks about transportation, land use, open space, food supply, energy, water, as one integral understanding of how urban infrastructure can help cities thrive. We need to integrate processes. Departments, agencies, jurisdictions, and funding streams have to be more integrated. And as you in the federal government are already doing, we welcome your commitment to have agencies work together, and we would like to see more of it. Streamline, streamline, streamline. One of you out there who I can't see said, it just really can't take 13 years to build 5 miles of a transit line. We would like to partner with the government in working at ways to remove the regulations that are burdensome for no purpose, focus on those that do help us achieve disclosure, transparency, and effectiveness in getting projects done. Innovation extends to funding and financing as well. We need high-speed rail in our regions, and to do that, as we heard from Mayor Diaz, we would recommend and strongly support the creation of a national infrastructure bank. We want to be a part of the shifting from thinking of ourselves as consumers to thinking of ourselves as investors, individually and collectively for the future. That money should flow to state of good repair. That's part of balanced and optimized transportation. And the fact that local transportation does generate revenue means that we in localities are ready to be creative, innovative partners if risks are appropriately assigned in bringing an array of financing tools to the building of infrastructure as well. Thank you, those of you mayors and others in our panel who said, hey, there is something we can do now. Gas prices are rising. Behavior is changing. How can we take advantage of this moment? Let's have a task force. Let's think of ways that we can collectively address choices in a moment when choices are in fact being made. We can do better, we can use technology to do better carpooling, car sharing. We can do transportation demand management. We can match seats with riders. We can market tax benefits for transit that already exist and make them more useful. We need to be partners with the federal government to make sure that these things happen smoothly and collectively to take advantage of this moment. So thank you, Mayor Nutter. Design matters. This wonderful example in New York is the High Line, where once industrial transportation has become transportation for well-being, people on bike, people on walks, people doing a fabulous, having an opportunity to experience their city. And in closing, I would just like to say what I heard and what was music to all of our ears, that the mayors and the metro areas are ready to be the best partners with the federal government to rebuild America's transportation and infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn. Moving on to Design and Development with Chris Lineberger. Chris Lineberger is a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He is an author, a land use strategist, teacher, developer, and researcher. His most recent book, The Option of Urbanism, Investing in a New American Dream, was published in 2008. Chris?
Metropolitan areas are the foundation of the American economy. Over 90% of the GDP is made in our metro areas. The other thing that is important to note is that our mayors, the mayors in this room, the mayors throughout the country, are the natural and proven leaders of our metropolitan areas. So what our panel and what our group came up with were things such as, and this reinforces things you heard from Maryland, is that the Obama administration has begun movement towards a new metropolitan federal partnership, a new federalism that will build upon this economic foundation and the proven on-the-ground leadership skills of our mayors. This partnership is based upon design. That means creative place-based design, equitable design, smart design, measurable design, and sustainable design. Design matters. Both members of this partnership will bring to it what they do best, but it is essential that it be uniquely design-driven, place-driven, and metropolitan-driven, a bottom-up process. One of the things that we have going for us in this country is that unlike 25 years ago when the Mayor's Institute was founded, the market wants this. As a real estate developer, as a past real estate researcher, I know there is huge pent-up demand for walkable urban development. What cities do best? That was not the case 25 years ago. We're seeing that the pendulum is swinging from only building drivable suburban development 25 years ago to where the pent-up demand is for walkable urban development. This is being driven by demographics, the grain and browning of America, the rise of the millennials. If you want to know who to blame, blame the kids. It's their fault. The rise of the single-family household and the change in the traditional family. This is a structural change that's taking place in this country, and it's taking place on the ground every day, leading to this pent-up demand for walkable urban development. But these examples are not just theoretical. They're taking place on the ground over the last 10, 15 years. Here's downtown Houston. Towards the east of its downtown was a pretty much forlorn, overlooked industrial area, cut off from the city. And through great design, and in particular, through a great park that is at the heart of the East Side, Houston now has a new heart. It has a new center where all of its people come and mingle. But from a developer point of view, what's really important is that hundreds of millions of private sector dollars have been invested around this park as a result of innovative, thoughtful design. But we have obstacles, and the major obstacle starts at the top, and that we, the people, have yet to really get that vision into our minds about what this future might be. And without that national vision, we will continue to flounder. That another obstacle is, of course, and you've heard it before, burdensome red tape and silo thinking. The Obama administration has gone miles in changing this, but there's many, many more miles to go. Another obstacle is basically out-of-date zoning, that many of our cities have zoning codes that only legally mandate drivable suburban development. As a developer, I've done 12 projects. Every single one of them has been illegal. It gets old. It'd be great if walkable urban development was by right. And here's an example in Portland where here is an industrial waterfront that I've seen many times over the years, and with creative overlay zoning, this is where it's going. So our recommendations is to continue to promote the national metropolitan policy. We need to elevate design excellence into our thinking about this, place-based design. We need to enhance current efforts to reduce federal silos and the red tape that results in 13 years required to put in place a new rail transit line. And very importantly, we need to ask the federal government to do what it can do best, not necessarily more cash, but credit enhancement, loan guarantees to help local jurisdictions and the private sector pay for much of the Marshall Plan that we just heard about from Mayor Diaz. So what does it all add up to? On the ground, we see lots of examples of smart planning, smart design, leading to increased land values. Here in Raleigh, you can see a 150-acre subdivision, 600 homes, that is equal in value to the Wachovia Center in downtown Raleigh, sitting on 1.2 acres. A 90-time increase in land valuation and, importantly for mayors, tax valuation. That this, and when you look at the cost of servicing through infrastructure, that 3-acre site in downtown Raleigh, the return on investment to the city of putting the infrastructure in was 35%. Compare that to that subdivision where the return is a mere 2% per year. The smart money goes with smart design. And here's another example from Portland, and I know we all have Portland fatigue, but they do so many good things there. The now famous Portland streetcar, where the first phase was a $55 million investment. It sparked the real estate development community to build $3.5 billion worth of development in the Pearl District. This is just the kind of leverage that can happen when you give the market what it wants and it's designed creatively. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. Moving on to design and 21st century challenges. Tony Griffin. Tony Griffin has built a 20-year career in both the public and private sectors, combining the practice of architecture and urban design with the execution of innovative, large-scale, mixed-use urban redevelopment projects and citywide and neighborhood planning strategies. In 2010, Griffin launched her own consulting practice, Urban Planning and Design for the American City, whose first project is to work with the Kresge Foundation and the Mayor of Detroit to develop a comprehensive citywide strategic plan, no easy task, in Detroit. Griffin is also an adjunct associate professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Tony Griffin.
Good morning. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but design matters. Why does it matter? It's about the people in cities and how good design is about improving their lives. We spent a minute in our panel talking about and reflecting upon why design matters and what it actually contributes to the health of cities. And these are some of the words that came across about 70 or 80 people in one room together: a sense of place, a quality of life, a promotion of growth, a promotion of identity. There really is no getting away from how design has a direct impact on people and the lives they lead in cities. Our panel was about the 21st century challenges, and we had three amazing speakers who spoke about smart cities, changing demographics, and public health. But as you can imagine, in a room full of mayors and designers from a diverse group of cities, both small and large, the 21st century challenges in urban America today are fairly vast. The list you see before you are a number of other challenges that we discussed in the room very briefly. And through a modest vote, our group decided to focus on these challenges: smart cities, vacant land and foreclosure, aging infrastructure, civic engagement, and the public realm. So what I'm going to do is outline for you some of the overarching opportunities, challenges, and solutions that cut across these different issues. There were 5 key opportunities that were discussed in our group. The first is that our public land is, in fact, our greatest civic asset. The foundation of a new public realm depends on the public's commitment and political will. The public realm and the city's public land is indeed a tremendous opportunity. This is a time for innovation. Allow for flexibility and innovation in regulation and funding. You've heard that theme across the other 2 speakers. And small moves, not just mega projects, can have a tremendous impact on the civic quality and health of a city. These are some examples of how some of those small-scale interventions work. This is a mural project that we saw from Tom Main yesterday. Leveraging integration, and Marilyn has already spoken about this, but moving to a framework of both integrated systems, processes, partnerships, and funding with design at the intersection. And we are beginning to see great examples of how the federal government is beginning to align itself towards this intersection. And we must set a bigger table. It is not just about the federal government coming to rescue the cities. It is not just about local city halls reaching down to try to affect their communities. The table has to be set to bring all partners together: the federal government, city agencies, nonprofits, philanthropy, and the business community. But as we all know, there are obstacles that exist there on the ground, and there were 6 key ones that cut across our issues. The significant limited human capital that exists in some of these cities. One of the mayors in our group talked about the fact that he has only volunteer staff to deal with some of these issues. So how do we reach down and find ways to give access to partnerships and other resources in creative ways to help these mayors? Some cities have a constrained local governance structure which dilutes their leadership ability to effectuate design in positive ways. And some cities actually lack the ability to access partnerships in a way that can help them find those resources to find technical expertise in their cities. The second obstacle was that if everything is a priority, actually nothing becomes a priority. There are great pressures that mayors have in our cities around trying to address near-term needs and the urgencies that are expressed by their constituents versus the ability to really do long-term planning for sustainable change, in part because there really is no incentive to do so. This happens at the city level, this happens at the regional level. Are we risk takers? Are we relying on older forms and models of evaluating value and not taking into consideration that some of these cities actually require us to be much more experimental in the ways with which we think about risk as a way of promoting innovation? We're dealing with 20th century regulations that actually discourage innovations. Our zoning regulations in many of our cities are antiquated, that haven't been updated for the last 50 to 60 years, and they don't allow for a flexible platform of innovation. Another example that was talked about was state DOT regulations and standards that are still designing, in some cases, 19th and 20th century infrastructure in a 21st century city. We continue to invest in this 20th century architecture in maintenance and repair. We're not stepping back and looking at the long-term viability of how relevant this infrastructure is and the way we use our roads and networks today. We can't talk about the design and health of cities without acknowledging that many of our cities, some of our cities, still have issues of the perception of public safety and how that limits the ability to attract capital, to attract investment, to attract intellectual talent in a way that can be productive towards these cities. And then lastly, we actually are in some cases conflicted about civic engagement. A number of people around our room discussed the fact that we all have real good intentions towards civic and design, and we want to get people together, but when we do, we actually have a diluted sense of the effectiveness and efficacy of how that civic engagement is actually supposed to guide us through a decision-making process for change. So we have 5 solutions that we'd like to put forward for you today. We must provide ways to find and strengthen local capacity within our municipalities. How can we tap philanthropy, such as we're doing in Detroit through the Kresge Foundation, to bring resources and put them in the ground and in City Hall to help? Similarly, HUD is doing the same thing and providing technical assistance to communities. We have to continue to find ways to bring that technical expertise on the ground. We've talked in some ways about the need of a more institutionalized position for urban design that could happen at state, regional, city, local, or federal levels, a chief urban designer or office of urban design. This is happening in London through the CABE organization, for example. And remember that we also have to fund, and remember there's a back end to design, which is enforcement and maintenance, and we have to make sure that we're providing resources for those important functions as well. Secondly, we should establish knowledge networking. This is an amazing convening, and the federal government is just fabulous at bringing together and convening talent. How do we make sure that that talent continues to permeate after we leave this room? And since we're in an electronic world where we're trying to enhance our systems of infrastructure, we also must enhance our technological infrastructure to allow for greater access of these knowledge networks as means of sharing, connection, and learning. It is imperative that we move to a set of 21st century regulations. We must reform our zoning to be more integrated and more innovative around mixed uses. Miami 21, the recent massive rezoning of Miami, is a tremendous and extraordinary effort to be applauded and replicated. How do we enable integrated infrastructure towards the complete streets concept that Marilyn talked about by creating reforms to DOT, street and highway standards to allow for combining of transportation, green systems, energy, water, and other systems, and pedestrians all in the same right-of-way. David Burney from New York showed us some great examples of the work that they're doing there on the ground to establish and institutionalize these standards and actually mobilize them and implement them throughout the streets of New York City. Fourth solution is to incentivize innovation and to enable flexibility. Our group talked a lot about the ways with which we have to find and be much more aggressive at how we braid and be creative about the streams of financing, bringing them together to help us with innovative projects, a sort of creative stimulus, if you will, to help us seed and fund experimentation at this smaller scale that, again, we felt and heard throughout the day can have an extraordinary impact on the design of our cities. The High Line, which Marilyn actually showed before for a different reason, was actually an open competition. This became a way by which to incentivize and promote innovation in design on a very challenging site. And our last solution was for allowing for new models of civic engagement. Teddy Cruz reminded us that we are in cities that have changing populations, changing demographics, and sometimes the standards and tools that we use for civic engagement aren't uniquely tailored to address and connect and be responsive to those populations. So perhaps in terms of thinking about civic engagement only as a physical space where people come together and dialogue, civic engagement actually becomes an action of doing, building, and creating, and that we actually form civic bonds and stewardship and pride in city through implementation as a way of bringing design awareness to cities. These are some examples of how that can happen on the ground to build our civic stewardship. So I will leave you with just a few last remarks on why design matters. Cities are where citizenship happens and where the majority of our populations are moving, as Chris reminds us. And so you, in fact, as the mayors in this room, are the chief urban designers of our cities. Cities are the places that should ignite our civic imagination. Cities have unique cultural identities that are really shaped by both formal design and informal design. And then if there are ways by which we can add value to those places by creating the flexibility and innovation and tools to continue the promotion of that at every scale, our cities will be better off forward. And lastly, it's not always about the big scale. The small scale really does matter and have a tremendous impact on the civic health and vitality of our cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. To wrap up our report out, we're going to have the Dean of American City Design, Mayor Riley, come up. Mayor Riley Jr. is considered one of the most visionary and highly effective governmental leaders in America. Now in his 9th term as mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, he has achieved a national profile for his work at home and beyond. He's a recipient of the National Medal for the Arts. Mayor Riley has set the national standard for urban revitalization, and of course, again, we think his greatest contribution was the creation of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. Mayor Riley.
Well, thank you very much, Jason, and thank all of you. Thank you, Manny and Mike and Chris and Tony and Marilyn, Elizabeth. Thank all of you for your wonderful participation, amazing distillation of a busy afternoon of a few hundred people yesterday. Quickly, a few years ago, I was in a doctor's office and fell a patient, and a much older person was who didn't live in the city of Charleston, was talking about something happening in his neighborhood, and he said, well, you know, it's too bad, but I know there's nothing that you can do about it. And of course, the fact is there is something that you can do about it, he can do about it, or should be done about it. There is not a juggernaut that is out of control that is forcing bad design decisions on America. Rather, it is our responsibility, and the more we study it through events like this in our work as mayors or design professionals, we understand the responsibility that we have to do it. And it's important to bring each of these issues down to the human level, the person, how it impacts an individual. You know, walkable is not a thing. It's one person at a time, often, having the opportunity to be in an inspirational setting, getting some exercise, and going about the business of life in that manner, one person at a time. Transit it's not a thing. It means that with it, someone may have 15 minutes in the morning and in the afternoon, or 30 minutes a day, or 150 minutes a week to spend with their child or children or spouse, or relax, or do something more meaningful and construction. Maybe walk the child to school, and of course, it isn't preordained that it is something wrong with children walking to school any longer. You know, the business of designing schools so there's a giant parking lot around it, rather than saying, now, how can we make this school walkable so as many kids as possible? We opened a school in Charleston, and it was in a neighborhood that we had planned new urbanism, and at the ribbon cutting, I said, the great thing about the school is that they're going to have to they need something much larger than you normally have at new schools, and that is bike racks, because so many kids can ride their bike to school. The well-designed building, you know, it's not a thing. A well-designed building is a opportunity for inspiration or interaction, or an opportunity for a pleasant rather than a dismal thought. You know, two people who had no training really in this, William H. Hollywhite and Jane Jacobs, they started from trying to understand how these decisions affected individual people, how they either made their lives more enjoyable and more constructive and more pleasant or less so. A beautiful park, parkland's not a thing. It's everybody at this moment in the beautiful parks in our cities or this weekend and all the stuff we can imagine. It's one human being at a time experiencing an opportunity in life for more joy and greater health and more pride and inspiration. It's our duty and responsibility. What the Obama administration has done, President Obama and Secretary Donovan and Secretary LaHood and Chairman Rocco Landsman and others in pulling together for the first time in our country's history an effort to develop a national urban policy is so important, and they're just beginning. This is the beginning of something that can never end. We need to be, and if this country is going to be successful, it has to be a country that understands it's an urban nation. There's got to be a new filter in front of every decision. Does this make towns and cities and metropolitan areas more livable, more creative, and more successful? But it's not the national government. But it's not the national government's responsibility alone. It's our responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. It's our mayor's responsibilities. I have a design review committee, city staff with designers. Nothing that any person in my city can see on a public thoroughfare that the city has anything to do with, whatever it is, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's a bench or parking, whatever. Or in a public restroom, what it looks like inside. If the public can see it, then we must make sure that all components of design have been considered so that it is fine as it possibly can be. All this is about creating excellence, not just more stuff, which is so important to our country. It is most appropriate that at the 25th anniversary of the Mayor's Institute for City Design, we have this opportunity to think about the future. It's appropriate because at every Mayor's Institute meeting, an amazing thing happens. You see and feel all these light bulbs going on in the minds of these leaders who cannot wait to go back home and to put these new ideas and thoughts into action. So we have discovered in this process not only how to make a more beautiful park, a more livable city or place in our city, we have discovered the extraordinary appetite and need to make our country a place of well-designed towns and cities. That's our duty, that's our responsibility. It was in the Athenian city oath. We have a responsibility not just to inherit our place, but to leave it more beautiful than we found it. Thank you very much.
So unfortunately, we've run a little bit long on time. I think we might have time for, we don't have time. So we're going to jump straight to Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan. To introduce him, I would like to ask the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, my boss, Rocco Landesman, to come up to the stage, please. We'll have time for, please. We'll have time for questions and comments and continuing the conversation with the crowd when we actually move into the federal panel. Sorry.
Thanks, Jason. It is my honor to introduce someone I call a colleague, a role model, and in fact, a friend. As a colleague, Sean Donovan
heads the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and has been the best partner the NEA has found. This past summer, HUD invited the NEA to participate with them in the distribution of regional planning funds. And for the first time ever, HUD was explicitly calling for plans that included the arts as one of the strategies for regional vibrancy. I did a roundtable with Sean's deputy, Ron Sims, in Miami around one of these grants. And Shelley Potisha, who heads the Sustainable Communities Partnership, joined me just yesterday at the Goodman Theater with Mayor-elect Emanuel to talk with the arts community here in Chicago. In fact, I feel like I'm stalking Shelley a little bit. Miami, Portland, now Chicago. As a role model, Sean led the way for much of what we are doing at the NEA. When Sean was in New York City, he headed their Department of Housing Preservation and Development, which is the largest developer of affordable housing in the nation. And that is exactly how Sean's predecessors conceived of the job. But Sean had a different vision. He saw affordable housing as one of the many intertwined strands that together weave a complete community. One where people live, work, play, and also one where they can prosper in place. Sean was developing a major 80-20 housing project on 10th Avenue in Manhattan, and he decided to put 3 theaters in the heart of it. These theaters would ensure both a steady flow and diversity of foot traffic. And in doing so, they would integrate the housing project with the rest of the community and not allow it to become a ghetto. It is no surprise, therefore, that HUD has led the way for the NEA's efforts at interagency collaborations among the federal government. Sean has not just talked the talk. He has been out in front walking the walk when it comes to working collaboratively and responsively. I can think of no one better to set the stage for the federal response to the mayor's recommendations. Please welcome my friend, Sean Donovan.
Rocco, thank you. And there are many things that I could say in return about Rocco, about the kindness he's shown, the friendship and the mentoring that he's done in this work. But I feel a little bit like I'm following a rock star at a concert. The thing I would say about Rocco, somebody who we wouldn't have thought of as a person who could enter the federal government in the way that he has, and in such a short time, make an enormously deep impact on the work that we all do. In music, there are people you refer to by one name, and we all know them. Madonna, Prince. In DC, there is now Rocco. That is the measure of the impact that he has made. I also have to say a deep and profound thank you to the Mayor's Institute for City Design for inviting me here today, particularly Story Bellows, as well as to our wonderful, wonderful partners at the Conference of Mayors, and to Tom Cochran in particular, who has been talking this talk and walking this walk for so many years. I also want to single out Mayor Riley, who, let's be honest, without his leadership, his vision, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be celebrating a quarter century of the gift that he has given us in the Mayor's Institute of City Design. Thank you, Mayor Riley. As a lapsed architect myself, it is a great honor to help celebrate the Institute's remarkable legacy of the last quarter century, recognizing that no one is better suited to be our city's chief urban designers than our mayors. That we hold this celebration here in Chicago, the birthplace of the City Beautiful movement, the site of Daniel Burnham's crowning achievement in urban planning, the place where H.H. Richardson, Louis Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright, each of whom worked for and studied under that one before them, left many of their most lasting contributions to design and architecture, is particularly appropriate. And in Mayor Daley, this city chose a leader who not only shared the vision of the MICD, but would not rest until it was realized here in Chicago. Thanks to his remarkable work, he can now rest. Rich, your vision has been realized. Look across the country and you'll see that Chicago has set the standard for urban design and neighborhood transformation. Today, it's hard to believe, but before Mayor Daley took office, like so many other cities, Chicago wasn't looking ahead to the next century. It was struggling to hold on to the current one. Yet only 8 years later, Chicago would be recognized as America's urban paradise and is today one of the greenest cities in the nation with more LEED certified buildings than any other city in the United States. Today, we have an opportunity to reflect on the steps Mayor Daley took to transform a symbol of the Rust Belt into a symbol of the 21st century global economy. We can look forward to how the Obama administration is planning to help Chicago's next mayor, my old colleague Rahm Emanuel, and every one of you continue and build on that progress. And as the upcoming panel will discuss in greater detail, we can talk about what it will take to share the innovations in urban design forged by Mayor Daley and the MICD here in Chicago and across the country with all of you and your communities. So let me begin by saying a few words about what those innovations were and why they were so important. Only a few blocks from here lies what will rightly be considered one of Mayor Daley's crowning achievements for decades to come. One I know Daniel Burnham would have been proud of. Where many saw blight, railroad tracks and parking lots, Mayor Daley saw something else, possibility. And in building Millennium Park, he realized that possibility, constructing not only an award-winning monument of architecture and landscape design, but a magnificent public space and an anchor for economic development. And by building neighborhoods of choice in the areas surrounding the park and beyond, he has made investments like Millennium Park truly catalytic for the city as a whole. Here again, where some might have only seen the price tag attached to design projects of this scale, particularly at a moment of enormous fiscal challenges for all levels of government, Mayor Daley saw a different kind of math, the potential to create value through tourism, property values, and other local economic activity that would more than pay for the cost of that initial investment. And by bringing people back to Chicago's downtown, that's exactly what Millennium Park has done. In the Loop alone, the area adjacent to the park, population has increased a remarkable 76%. And Mayor Daley didn't just see possibility in neighborhoods and parks yet to be designed. He also saw neighborhoods that were standing in the way of realizing his vision of possibility. He realized that in too many communities in Chicago, you could predict the lifespan of a child by the zip code that they grew up in. He realized what so many of you have, that we can't win the future and out-educate the rest of the world when we're leaving a whole generation of kids behind in our poorest neighborhoods. Today, this country has 20% of our children living in poverty, costing a stunning $500 billion a year, which is 4% of our GDP. And so with his public housing plan for transformation, Mayor Daley brought a very different frame of design to Chicago neighborhoods, replacing isolated blocks of high-rise towers with a mix of housing built along the historic grid of city streets, giving families long trapped in concentrated poverty a path to real housing choice in neighborhoods around the city. That new frame helped the neighborhoods surrounding that housing attract the retail and commercial businesses they need to thrive and create jobs. It helped them capitalize on their locational advantages, from their proximity to public transportation, to improving schools, to walkable streets. And it meant he would use the power of the mayor's office to help neighborhoods attract art institutions and artists. As essential as artists are to teaching our kids to engage in the kind of creative thinking that's essential to economic innovation, they're also, as Rocco likes to say, creative placemakers. In cities across the country, from New York to New Orleans, we've seen when artists move in, others follow. From families looking to raise their children in dynamic, diverse neighborhoods, to young creative professionals with skills that are essential to the 21st century global economy. In our old economy, people moved to where the jobs were. And back then, whole cities were one-company towns. What Mayor Daley realized was that in today's economy, it's the other way around. Capital and jobs follow people, and talent is mobile. And what that talent is looking for is quality of place, dynamic, diverse neighborhoods. That's why nurturing a vibrant arts community in our neighborhoods isn't just about amenities or entertainment, it's about economic development. It's about building cities that are successful, resilient, and economically vibrant. To steal from Rocco once again, art works. In doing all this, Mayor Daley recognized what I know many of you discussed at MacArthur's Arts and Culture in Action event earlier this week, that linking the cultural sector to community development efforts requires leadership at the local level. Of course, Mayor Daley also realized something else, that he needed a different kind of federal partner. This audience knows that the urban renewal movement that began in the 1930s and the one-size-fits-all approach that typified federal policy in the decades to come didn't end poverty, it often entrenched poverty, isolating many families from opportunity, not for years, but for generations. Urban renewal saw communities not for what they were or could be, but as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. But with tools like Hope 6, that began to change. As Chicago knows from its 7 public housing transformations under the program, Hope 6 wasn't just about tearing down buildings. It was about tearing down ossified social and community development policies as well. It was about making the federal government a different kind of partner to communities that didn't apply its monochrome frame of design to community development, but one developed at the local level to respond to local needs and local vision. Despite this success, the tragedy of devastated neighborhoods isn't unique to public housing. If you want to see that for yourself, get on the Green Line and ride it south to the last stop. You'll see a forlorn neighborhood called Woodlawn, which, despite being just blocks from one of the world's great universities, has seen decades of decline and neglect. Ground zero of its distress is a privately owned, HUD-subsidized housing development called Grove Park, surrounded by boarded up and foreclosed homes. That's why we've introduced our Choice Neighborhoods initiative, which brings to bear the private capital and mixed-use, mixed-income tools of Hope 6 to transform not just public housing, but all housing in a neighborhood. And I'm proud to say that Woodlawn is a finalist in that competition. Their application proposed an innovative partnership with Hull House and the University of Chicago's Urban Education Institute to redevelop Grove Park and to transform education and health services for the families that live there. Just last week, the architecture critic, of all people, from the New York Times, called Choice Neighborhoods the most promising take on public housing in America that we've seen in decades. Despite this promise, let me address a specter that hangs over all of our discussions at this conference. We all know these programs we care so deeply about are under attack. For 2011, we will only have $100 million for the entire nation for Hope 6 and Choice Neighborhoods. And we're not going to transform neighborhoods of concentrated poverty around the country with funding for 4 grants a year. Yet right now, we estimate that there is $25 billion of private and public capital sitting on the sidelines waiting to be invested in America's affordable housing that could unleash this transformation at a much broader scale. Here's the problem. We can't touch that capital. Antiquated rules developed nearly half a century ago prevent anyone but the federal government from financing improvements to public housing. As Mayor Daley understood, and as Chicago knows better than anyone, these rules haven't just stood in the way of building housing, they've also stood in the way of building anything around that housing. The grocery stores, schools, and retail businesses that communities need to thrive. Putting an end to the era of the superblock, of homes disconnected from schools, jobs, transportation, and opportunity, is one big reason the Obama administration is proposing a demonstration in our budget to bring private capital to over 250,000 publicly owned homes. It's based on a simple idea. We can't design and build good neighborhoods if we're walling off our poorest families from the opportunity that surrounds them. With these new mixed-use, mixed-finance tools, all the partners we need will be at the table, making a difference in the communities that need them most. At the same time, we're following your lead to make our neighborhoods stronger and better connected to opportunity. These challenges don't end at the end of the block or the city line. That's why the Obama administration is providing seed money that encourages communities to pool their best thinking and resources. Because as mayors, you're designers not just of your cities, but together of your regions as well. As Chicago knows all too well, thanks to the work of groups like the Center for Neighborhood Technology, it's no coincidence that the ghost towns of the foreclosure crisis were the most unsustainable, with the least access to transportation and, by extension, to schools and jobs. Indeed, thanks to sprawl, energy costs, and a host of other factors, for every dollar the average household earns, they now spend 52 cents just on housing and transportation combined. You all know that better urban design can link where we live to where we work in ways that are profound. That's why the Obama administration has just made the most significant investment in planning in a generation. Last fall, HUD and our partners at the Department of Transportation, and I want to particularly thank Roy Kienitz, who's here, for all his leadership on this. Together, we awarded nearly $170 million in planning grants to ensure regions and communities across the country have more housing and transportation choices, more energy independence, and more economic competitiveness. And I'm proud to say, for the first time, our regional planning grant program, thanks to the partnership of Rocco, explicitly contained language encouraging the arts community to participate in that grant application process. These funds are making a difference right here in the Chicago metro area, where a diverse consortium, including the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, local businesses and civil rights leaders, and the Center for Neighborhood Technology, have proposed a plan to create jobs, more walkable neighborhoods, and affordable housing by capitalizing on this region's rich public transportation system. This grant wouldn't have been possible without Mayor Daley's leadership to bring the region's mayors and other stakeholders together. As so many of you have in the years since, Mayor Daley realized early on that in an economy where America's metros are hotbeds of innovation, today they generate 90% of our economic output. The time for the old fights between cities and suburbs was over, and the time had arrived for communities that share problems to start sharing solutions. That explains the extraordinary demand for our grant program. And it wasn't just coming from our largest metros. Over half of our regional grants were awarded to regions with populations less than 500,000 and rural places with fewer than 200,000 people. Winners included rural counties in Central Florida, Appalachia, Western North Carolina, and Native American tribes in South Dakota and Washington State. In fact, one of my favorite awards was to a Native American tribe to create their reservation's first ever zoning code. Cities, towns, and regions who embrace sustainable communities will have a built-in competitive edge in attracting jobs and private investment and be able to solve 3 or 4 problems with a single investment. This regional approach is one of the reasons Chicago is today home to more than 400 major corporations, including 28 Fortune 500 headquarters, demonstrating once again that infrastructure investments with the right kind of planning aren't about government that's bigger, but government that's smarter. The goal of each of these efforts is the same: to realize possibilities for your cities and regions, possibilities your predecessors could only have imagined. Possibilities like jobs for the 21st century, located closer to where we live. Possibilities like healthier, more inclusive neighborhoods where kids can play outside and breathe clean air, where opportunities for people of all ages, incomes, races, and ethnicities are never determined by their zip code. As your partner, my job is clear: to help you turn possibility into reality, so that every mayor can design the stronger, more resilient, more dynamic future for your cities that America needs to compete in the 21st century and win the future. That is exactly what Mayor Daley has done and what Mayor Emanuel is poised to continue doing here in Chicago. It's what the more than 850 mayors the Mayor's Institute of City Design has graduated are doing in your communities around the country. As our city's chief urban designers, it's what each of you does every day. I'm proud to join each of you in designing the future. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your partnership. Would love to take a few questions.
Some people have to come up to the mics.
Okay. I'm told there are mics available.
I guess this one's working. Mr. Secretary, thank you, first of all, for coming. We really appreciate it. If I can say one thing, I would say simply that continue allowing cities like ourselves in Racine, Wisconsin, if you ever want to come an hour north and see some great stuff going on, we'll welcome you. But continue allowing us to utilize the funds for rehab. We get 3 times the dollar value for rehab versus building new. So please allow that to continue, whether it's NSP or the Hope 6 or whatever programs you're talking about. We can do far more with rehabbing far faster than we can with building new. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm Mayor Ryback from Minneapolis. I want to
Great to see you.
Good to see you again. Thank you for the phenomenal work. Part of the discussion we had in our group had to do with the fact that you can isolate transportation or housing or any of these other things, or the arts or energy, but really we're in a new period of time where the old government structures aren't working because all of these are together as one. Now, you get that because you're doing that at a federal level. We encourage you to keep doing it and to move further, including to connect energy and even water use into all of these different federal levels together. But as you look to us locally, can you also recognize we're trying to reorganize locally and it's different across the country? I don't think the federal government should be dictating to the locals, here is how a metropolitan governance should be. Instead, we think that you should challenge us for outcomes. Come together with ways that we can rebuild communities with housing, transportation, energy, arts all together, and we'll organize locally on the way to apply to that.
Yep, it's a great point, and I think where we've begun, and I'm thinking of the partnership we have with DOT and NEA here. When we put together our Sustainable Communities award process, first of all, the idea that we would take transportation planning money and HUD planning money and put it together and award it at one time, that we got, and this, for those of you who haven't been federal bureaucrats, this may not sound revolutionary, but it is, to get employees from EPA, DOT, and HUD in the same room using the same process to get more than a dozen foundations in the room with us at the same time to go through these applications and award them at once was, I think, a remarkable step forward. I think the challenge for us now is how do we take this, what's begun with new money, for all its innovation, $170 million isn't our budget to do these things. It's got to be $44 billion at HUD. How do we take this into the mainstream of the program? And I think where you could help us We had a long discussion about this the other day. So we have, whether it's CDBG or HOME or all these programs, we have jurisdictions that we work with, and you get awards, and you have to come to us with a consolidated plan process that's separate for each of the jurisdictions in a metro area, separate from the Department of Transportation's planning process. We want to create a way that all of you could come in regionally together and do a consolidated con plan, for example, or maybe even, hey, let's get crazy, connect your con plan to your transportation plan and make it one plan. But there is no one-size-fits-all template for that. So getting your help in thinking about how do we allow this to happen, how do we encourage it to happen, without going back to the sort of one-size-fits-all of saying, well, every region has to do it this way or that way, is not a simple thing to design at the federal level. And so I think this is a perfect kind of match between the kind of thinking that you're doing here, the work we do with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the way that we can continue to evolve this and really drive this kind of regional thinking into the core of our programs, our mainstream programs across HUD, DOT, and all the other agencies.
Could you tell a room of politicians how we can help you with the politics of that at a very tough time?
How long have you got? Any other questions?
Secretary Diamond, Ralph Becker from Salt Lake City.
I thought that was Mayor Becker. It's hard to see with the lights here, but good to see you.
Good seeing you. Thank you again for joining us. Actually, Mayor Ryback really made the point and asked the question that I was thinking of, but just to expand on it in terms of the next step. And I welcome the comments you made about how to further integrate these programs. And from my vantage point and perspective in our region, it's going to take the federal government helping direct and provide guidelines for our region to come together around the kind of integration too. I think in different regions it may be a little different. In our region, we have a lot of the calcification that you've worked through at the federal level. We need to do at the regional and local level as well. But my question really goes to the final point I think that you were asked to address, which is we're obviously facing a time of greatly diminishing resources federally, and we're feeling the pinch of that. And at the same time, difficult times at the local level, and so it seems we need to leverage our abilities. You've got a lot of mayors here who I think are very supportive of what you're doing. How can we best support you and support the work that we're all doing to achieve the kind of integration and forward thinking? Because I think that seems to be what's getting lost the most in the congressional debate.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a great question, and I touched on it in my remarks, but let me say a little bit more about it. Look, there is no question that we have had to make, and we're going to have to make some very tough decisions about the federal budget. I think the fact that $100 million in sustainable communities funding remained in the 2011 budget, in the deal that was recently reached, is a real testament to the fact that all of you have recognized and have encouraged your delegations, your members of Congress, to think about this not as the federal government coming in and imposing planning, but something that really is about your vision, something you want and you really need. But that discussion is only going to get harder in 12, and I think we need to do a couple things. One is really show how the work that we do here in these kind of discussions you've had at the summit is intimately linked with jobs and economic development. That when you locate housing closer to transportation, whether it's because a family can spend 42 cents on housing and transportation combined instead of 52 cents, whether it's because you're going to attract companies that say, hey, I don't want to go to a place where my workers are sitting in traffic 2 hours every day to get to work. That's not a place with a quality of life where they want to be. And all the other ways that the work that we're talking about here at the summit is connected to jobs and economic development, I think that's an incredibly important message to send. And I think it's particularly important to send that message that this isn't just about red and blue states. It isn't just about you know, Chicago's and New York's and LA's. It's about smaller places, as I said in my remarks, that this is really something that all of you can come together and say, this is important to our economic competitiveness. And I think the last point I would make, this goes back to what I said about Millennium Park. You know, it's very easy to take a narrow view and say whether it's, you know, $100 million or $1 billion on a major infrastructure investment. If you're looking at it just through that frame, we're always going to lose on that math. We've got to expand the frame to really be able to make the case that, hey, in the long run, this is an investment that is going to pay for itself. And you've done this remarkably well in Salt Lake City and in Utah on homelessness. A very good example to say, hey, we'll invest in supportive housing. It saves, you know, 2 or 3 times its cost in lower emergency room visits, costs in shelters and jails. That's the same kind of broader thinking we need to bring to this. And we need your help in really proving that. How do we make the case specifically that these kind of investments, whether in planning, in infrastructure, really do generate more than their cost in the long run in returns? I've seen that argument work at the local level in New York, at the federal level, but we all have to make that case very persuasively. And we've got, I'll be honest, we've got no more important work ahead of us for the next 3 months as we build toward the 2012 budget to make that case for all the programs that we've talked about that you care about.
Thank you.
Can I have a question?
Yes. Could you give us a little, just a brief overview about some of the types of programs that HUD supports that are outside of what people consider their traditional mission? In my community, when you talk about HUD funding for housing, it's always generally categorized as low income. But I know HUD has other programs. Can you take a few seconds to address some of those other programs that really maybe might focus on helping to redevelop middle-class housing in urban areas?
Yeah. Well, clearly, our work through FHA has been absolutely central. Last year, 40% of Americans who bought homes used FHA insurance. And I think one of the areas where Carol Galante on the multifamily side has done a remarkable job is to really begin to transform our programs so that they are much more focused on the ability, whether it's to do preservation or to do new construction in ways that are much more friendly to the agenda that you've talked about at the summit. Whether it's things as simple as using antiquated environmental procedures that really limited our ability to do infill or redevelopment, whether it's new ways of bringing together commercial space with residential to do additional points or fast tracking for transit-oriented development in our grant program. All of those are ways that we've really tried, at least begun, to better support the agenda that the Mayor's Institute has on design. And so I would really point you to the work that we do on FHA insurance, because we've become, with the economic crisis, we've become a much more important part of the financing options for just about any kind of preservation or development on the single family and on the multifamily side. So that's one area. The other thing I would just say, you know, no stranger to all of you, CDBG is far and away our most flexible tool. It's one that is going to be targeted, was targeted by the House in their budget, and it's one that we all need your voices on, particularly in making the case to members of the House how critical it is because it's your most flexible tool. One last question?
Yes, thanks for your remarks. I'm thinking that as we seek new paradigms in terms of urbanization and housing in this country, we also should seek a new interface, a critical interface with the American public. I'm thinking that there seems to be a communicational gap between cultural and governmental institutions and the public itself. The question is, how do we re-energize the American public to engage or to embrace the notion of the public itself, so that public housing is not a forbidden word in this country? Thank you.
A nice small question to end with. I guess I would say a couple things, and one quite specific, which is that the work that we've done around our Sustainable Communities grants, and I think, again, Roy and the team at DOT, the folks we work with at EPA, the foundations that we've partnered with, a central part of planning has to be where it's successful, particularly where it's focused on redeveloping or developing neighborhoods that have historically been disadvantaged, is creating an inclusive planning process. And Mayor Ryback just asked a question a moment ago. I spent some time talking to them about their Sustainable Communities Planning Grant in the Twin Cities area. And one of the things that I was most impressed with was the way that they've engaged minority communities near transit, the way that they've gone and targeted small businesses who were afraid of a tram line coming through their neighborhood because of what it could mean to their business shutting down for some significant period of time or a loss of foot traffic. Where planning is done well, it is the opposite of the old sort of federal one-size-fits-all model of where we sit in Washington inside the Beltway and draw pattern books of what public housing should look like or what regional planning should look like, and then sort of hand it down to mayors for implementation. We've got to flip that, and that means not just you all coming together in regional areas, but really finding ways to engage residents, small businesses, communities from the ground up in the beginning of those planning processes. And look, I've been yelled at enough community meetings in New York City, and this ain't easy a lot of the time. But where it's done well, where you get those kind of creative tensions on the table early on, it has huge benefits in the ability to actually execute on these plans in the long run. And so I think that's part of it. I think the second thing I would say is more and more we have to make the case, just as we've done, I talked about for the planning work that we're doing, that having more than 20% of our kids living in poverty, entire communities of concentrated poverty that are kind of left behind, hurts all of us as a country. And that in a world where China and India are going to educate enough kids, more kids than we have in our entire population in this country over the next few years, that we're all going to lose the economic race of the future if we're leaving a whole segment of our kids behind in neighborhoods of poverty. And so that's an area where I think we have to keep making the case, just as I said about design and the importance of infrastructure investments. I think we have to make the case that this is an investment, whether it's in reimagining public housing, whether it's investing adequately in affordable housing, that this is really an investment in all of us, not just something that divides the public and opinion. So that's my best shot at it. Thank you all, and congratulations again on a wonderful summit here. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Secretary Donovan. That was awesome. To kick off our next portion of the morning, the federal panel, I want to welcome to the stage Mayor Elizabeth Kautz. Elizabeth Kautz was appointed to the City Council in 1992 and began serving as mayor of Burnsville, Minnesota in 1995, where she is presently serving her 6th term. Mayor Kautz is serving as president of the United States Conference of Mayors and represents Burnsville on numerous local, regional, state, and national boards. As mayor, she has focused on many issues such as restoring safe neighborhoods, maintaining a quality level of community development, and preserving the natural environment. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Kautz.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to all of our moderators, our roundtable facilitators, and also to Secretary Donovan for continuing to come and to support us in our message and also in the work that we do together. Yesterday and today, we have heard that we mayors are the architects and the urban designers. We are the chief urban designers of our cities. And that we need to look to the future, and we need to chart a new course. All of this is very true, and that we must do this. It isn't something that we should, it is something that we must do. So as I listened and take in all of the things that have been said and the recommendations and the solutions that can help us to move forward, it was clear to me that if we do not do this, we do a great injustice to the generations that will follow us. You see, as we move to the future and we create great design for our cities, what we do is we leave for future generations a knowledge about who we are and the values that we have, the principles that we live by, and the respect that we have for the built environment. And oh, by the way, that we appreciate design and art, the aesthetics that touch the soul of the human spirit. And so it is important for us, as we move to the future and we go back to our cities and we talk about design, and to take on that mantle, I ask you to do this because I have done it in my city, and it is true. Take an inventory of all of your product. When I talk about product, I talk about your housing stock, your commercial and industrial stock, and ask yourself, do you have a balanced land use zoning? Do you have the revenue? If you are one of the cities or states that depend on a property tax, or if you depend on a sales tax, it is really a must to understand your revenue base as well as your expenditures. And then as you look to designing your city, design with an eye to the aesthetics and to the arts. Because you see, all of us love to go to beautiful places. All of us like an environment that we don't know why, but when we go there, it puts a smile on our face. It allows us to share with our children and our grandchildren God's beautiful environment, and that there are people who are good stewards of it. So as I continue to look at what we're doing here, I heard beautiful recommendations about tools that will help enhance that journey that we have to the future. And one of those tools is a strong partnership with the federal government. And to look at each of us, the different cities, as a unique creation, and that one size does not fit all. What I also liked hearing was, let's be honest about the cost of transportation. You see, transportation links us all, from neighborhood to neighborhood, from city to city, from coast to coast, and from border to border. And it's not one kind of transportation either. It is about a multi-use of the different transportation modes that would help us. And so as we go forward, let's remember all that we have learned, because this has been a rich environment with a great knowledge base and a brain trust that has given us information that will benefit us as we go forward. And so, as design matters, remember generations to come. Remember the legacy that we must leave. And then we must roll up our sleeves and work together to make this all happen. So across these United States, we have built cities with design and art that warms the human spirit and nourishes the soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kautz. We're going to get now into our federal panel. If I could ask the federal panelists to please join us on the stage. I'd like to just introduce them briefly to all of us. Let's start with Derek Douglas. Derek Douglas serves on the White House Domestic Policy Council as Special Assistant to President Barack Obama, where he leads the Domestic Policy Council's work on urban and metropolitan policy issues. Prior to working in the White House, Douglas served as Washington counsel to New York Governor David A. Paterson and director of Governor Paterson's Washington, D.C. office. Prior to his appointment in 2007, Douglas served as Associate Director of Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. Rocco Landesman, my boss. Rocco was confirmed by the United States Senate in 2009 as the 10th chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. Landesman's career has been a hybrid of commercial and artistic enterprises, and prior to joining the NEA, he was a Broadway theater producer. In 2005, he purchased Jujamson, a company that owns and operates 5 Broadway theaters, which he operated until President Obama announced his intention to nominate Landesman to the NEA chairmanship. Oops, just find myself here. Roy Kienitz. Roy Kienitz serves as Undersecretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Sworn into office in 2009, Kienitz assists the Secretary in formulating national policies affecting surface transportation and aviation. He shares Secretary LaHood's goals of making safety, livability, sustainability, and economic recovery the primary objectives of DOT. Kienitz joined DOT with diverse transportation policy expertise. He has worked for nonprofits and has held both state and federal government positions. And finally, Salin Gervigis, sorry I slaughtered that, serves as Senior Advisor at HUD in the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities. Prior to HUD, Salin served as Senior Associate at the Annie E. Casey Foundation with responsibilities in the Civic Sites and Initiatives Unit and the Center for Family Economic Success for the Anchor Institution portfolio. The Influence and Knowledge of Development portfolios for neighborhood development, the National Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, and emerging portfolios on green and sustainability issues and making markets work. And to host our federal panel, we have the absolutely fabulous Carol Coletta. Carol Coletta is leading Art Place, a new national initiative to accelerate creative placemaking across the United States. Art Place is a collaboration of the nation's top foundations and the National Endowment for the Arts. Prior to joining Art Place, Carol was president and CEO of CEOs for Cities. For 10 years, she hosted and produced a nationally syndicated public radio show, Smart City. She also served as executive director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. Carol is a passionate advocate for cities, and she has devoted her life to answering the question, what makes cities succeed? Carol was a Knight Fellow in Community Building at the University of Miami School of Architecture and was named as one of the world's 50 most important urban experts by a leading European think tank. We're all in for a treat. Thank you, Carol Coletta.
Well, we have about 45 minutes to have a conversation with this panel, and I am delighted to have the opportunity to talk with all of them. And I want to start with you, Derek. I know you've heard the presentations this morning. What resonated for you in those presentations?
Well, first of all, let me just say how much I'm delighted to be here with you all today and on behalf of the President to represent him and the administration at this event. It's really a monumental achievement, the 25-year anniversary of the Mayor's Institute for City Design. And I want to thank Rocco and everyone at NEA and all the mayors and those at Tom Cochran and the folks at U.S. Conference of Mayors for all the work you've been doing in putting on this tremendous event. There were a number of things that were mentioned, actually, that resonated very well and sparked a lot of ideas in my mind, at least. A lot of what I heard was reinforcing of what we're trying to do, which was comforting, but there were things that were mentioned where I think there are areas for us to improve. One of the things that really struck me, and it's an obvious point, but it's one that I think we all have to do a better job on, and it's what Mayor Riley kept hitting on, which was this whole issue, everything we're talking about here, everything we're trying to push at the federal level with respect to our policy. If we don't find better ways to connect it to the individuals, to make it something real for people, we aren't going to get the momentum behind it that we can and that we should. And when you just look at federal government, you look at the stuff that's got the most money, you can see the constituency behind those things. And this touches so many people's lives in so many meaningful ways. We have to, when we talk about our sustainable communities work, our regional innovation work, that is just this abstract concept. And so I know that the folks at HUD, DOT, EPA are looking at that, but we have to build that more into our messaging, and we need the stories from you all, the concrete successes as to how that stuff is changing people's lives. When we're pushing forward on it, our transportation work and our housing work, we can get that momentum. I think a second thing that was reinforcing that really stood out, and a couple of the sessions reported this out, was the importance of breaking down the silos and integration. And both in terms of policy, so making sure that when we're thinking about designing policy, we think about how issues connect, but also in terms of process. Setting up the interagency working groups and the work streams so that the agencies are actually at the table coordinating. We've done a lot of this work. The Partnership for Sustainable Communities is one example, but we have an interagency working group around neighborhood revitalization, where a lot of the programs that Secretary Donovan talked about, Choice Neighborhoods, Promise Neighborhoods, Public Safety, where those agencies are coordinating. We have another interagency working group around regional innovation clusters and regional economic and workforce development that's been doing a lot of innovative work. I think one thing that we need to do more of with those groups is make sure that the integration that we're trying to do at the federal level, we're connecting it with the mayors and you all here. We need to have you all at the table when we're thinking about breaking down the silos, because you all can tell us these are the silos, these are the areas that need to get broken down. And I think that there's been tremendous work amongst ourselves at the federal level, but we got to now start more bringing you all and connecting it down to the local level at the same policy development table. The third thing that I just wanted to touch on that really hit me was what Tony talked about around capacity. One of the things that I have heard a lot, and those of us, all of us who work on urban-related issues has heard a lot, is that you all are doing a tremendous job in the administration to lay out this new vision of sustainable development and regional economies and metro and all this sort of thing. But as an example you gave, they will say, I don't have a planning staff, or I've got one person, or I've got volunteers. How is that vision accessible to me when I don't have the capacity, I don't have the bench within my government to reach that? And this is an issue that we have been thinking very, very hard about in the federal government. We think that the answer has to be interagency. It's not just one agency who has a good technical assistance program for a very isolated program. Because as was mentioned, you all are thinking about design in a comprehensive way. So our capacity building strategies and our on-the-ground support needs to also reflect that. So we've been working with a number of agencies. There's a group I have that's got 13 agencies at the table thinking about how can we bring more technical assistance, capacity building types of supports to communities that need them in an interagency fashion. And so when hearing that as the lead point from your session kind of emboldened me more to take that back and say, this is a need. It's not just about throwing a bunch of money and a new idea and strategy out there. It's about making sure we're doing something to also make it accessible and supporting communities so that they can partake from it.
Great. Salin?
Thank you, Carolyn. It's an honor to share the stage with these gentlemen, and hopefully I'll contribute something of value. There are about 4 things. There's some intentional alliteration here. Maybe that's the way my mind works, and maybe it's the designer in me coming out. One was around imagination. When any of us, all of us, are engaging in communities, one of the things that needs to be re-envisioned and re-energized in our places is a sense of imagination. And design is key, obviously, for that. There are lots of impediments for people to be able to envision what we're talking about. The ideas have to get concrete, and when we're out as a member of the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities and we're having conversations in neighborhoods, and particularly they may be neighborhoods of distress, when you're around the table talking in the abstract, the necessity of someone saying, and this is what it looks like, and this is what it means for you. I think that was huge. So the sense of imagination and that invitation for you to engage with us and to really hold us accountable to say, how can we reimagine again? The emphasis on innovation, I think, is huge. When we have gone out into communities, the people talk about the new tools that are coming about, but we need new approaches. One thing that I think all of us, as a part of the federal government, would attest to is we're not great at flexibility. We're not great at nimble. And I heard Mayor Ryback's comment about, and other folks' comments about not one size fitting all. We work better when one size fits all. We don't work well when there's a lot of variation. The necessity of our conversation to help us really think through what is the pattern going to look like in a particular place? What does it mean to not consider places all the same and to really treat them individually and differently, but to also, as part of as a federal partner, to really encourage the stretch. We're in communities where part of the conversation, I don't think, is as ambitious as it needs to be. There's not enough of a stretch there. How do we have a developmentally appropriate conversation for a region, but acknowledge that a stretch is necessary? I often talk about intentionality. Derek makes this point, and Secretary Donovan makes this point about the necessity of us really engaging in building the evidence for how this matters for people. And one of the questions we get as part of the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Program is, at a time of economic distress, why are we spending money this way? And I would say, and I hope you would join me in saying, there are very few things, strategic things, that happen by chance. We have to create spaces where people wrestle through the ideas together, and intentionality matters. And planning and design really, I think, create a space for people being intentional about a vision and a future that they want. That's the third thing. The fourth thing has been mentioned a lot here today, and that's around integrated approaches. Yeah. We have really gotten from many of your communities, and we're hopeful about, as Secretary Donovan talked about any number of other communities who are going to be able to take advantage of the Regional Planning Grant Program. We've heard about the applause you've given around the integrated approaches, but as we're starting to mix it up in the communities, as mayors have talked about, things are not integrated on the ground. Things are still getting worked out among all of us. And we're learning as we go, but the necessity of making those connections on the ground, and I think the necessity of all of us continuing to be as concrete and rigorous around the multiple benefits of this work, the investing once and investing well, all of those statements that all of us, I think, make. I think those are the things that spring for me from the comments of this morning, and also even the lessons from all of you when we get on the ground.
One thing I'd like to come back to, something you and Derek have just mentioned, is this need to get stories from communities on why this matters. And I think a question for both of you ultimately is, okay, so how do we do that? How do we get you those stories in a form that you can use? Roy, let me ask you to address this question. What resonated for you in these in the reports that were made this morning?
Sure, thank you very much. We're a little short on time, so I will not say that design matters, because I don't want to take the time to do that. And I will not thank all of the many people in the room who need to be thanked, with one exception, and that's Mayor Riley, who is our godfather here, and we should all be aware of that. I'll go through a couple quick things in order that we heard earlier, specifically about transportation. The first was the sort of I think what has become, what used to be heretical but is now a fairly obvious admonition of don't think mode by mode, think of a system. We are doing our level best at DOT to do that. Our tools to carry forth that vision are pretty limited. As some of these folks up here know, we have been involved in lengthy discussions about how to do a better job of having the sort of operating instructions for the Department of Transportation allow us to carry out that vision with much greater freedom, and we have high hopes there. But speaking of diluted decision making, those of us from Washington are certainly understand that. Although I think one of the reasons that Rahm came back to Chicago is because there's like no diluted decision making here. So, second is state of good repair being a priority. That's obviously a priority for us from a policy basis. It also, for better or for worse, has become a bit of a default in a federal program which has become so underfunded that you really can't do anything big anymore, be it a big good thing or a big bad thing. We are probably doing a lot fewer big bad things than we used to do, and we're perhaps doing a lot fewer big good things than we used to do. We're doing a lot of small things, and state of good repair has been a beneficiary of that, unless you own I-95 through Philadelphia. I don't know if Mayor Nutter's still here, but you haven't got the money to do that, and I don't know where we're going to get it. So.
Thanks. Glad I came back.
The third is a corollary to that, which is another thing we'd mention, which is small is okay. You can actually make a big difference with small projects. And I have good news for you there. Since small projects are all we can afford, we're actually in that business right now. Excellent. The Tiger program, I think, is a pretty good example of that. Even when we have a fairly large amount of money in that world of new discretionary dollars, the grants are $20 or $30 million each. You're not going to change the world with $20 or $30 million. And for those of you who have a $1 billion transit project that you want to do, that's not a very helpful message to hear. But if you think of it in a different direction, which is what could I do that is maximally impactful with $20 million, there's actually a lot of great answers to that question. So we're in the business of that, and luckily we have a third round of Tiger funding that we've been allowed to do as part of the recent budget deal. So stay tuned for that. Fourth is dollars for planning. That's something that I've personally been a big believer in for a long time, and we've really gotten, with the help of all the federal partners as part of the partnership. We're doing our best on that, both within the confines of the partnership and individually at agencies. Although I will say, allocating $50 million in planning grants on a multi-agency basis was way more work than allocating $500 million in capital grants just with one agency. So that's a burden that we're willing to carry, though, because it's important. And particularly in the transportation world, a lot of you who participated in the MPO and the state planning process for years about how to spend transportation dollars. And the original theory of the reforms back 20 years ago was get the right people around the table when you're picking things off the list to fund to make sure it gets done fair. And I think what we've learned since then is if all there is on the list when you're sitting down to pick stuff is the same old, it doesn't matter who's at the table. And so we have spent much more much more time and energy focusing on not what is coming out of the development pipeline at the back end when you get to programming decisions, but what is going into the development pipeline at the front end. And that's where project planning and regional planning type of stuff is important, because we need the MPO board to have a list of exciting things to choose from among rather than a list of boring things to choose from among. So that's something that we're spending a lot of energy on. I'm sort of doing these in kind of order from easier to harder. The last one on the list is, why does it take 13 years to build a transit project? And that is a sad story that we're working very hard to change, but it's got a lot of pieces to it. The obvious one is, the federal process, particularly alternatives analysis and engineering and ridership projections, is so burdensomely difficult. And that is true, and we actually have a regulatory process going on right now where we have asked for input from y'all and everybody in the world who has to deal with this process about ways to simplify it. I don't know that we're ever going to get away from a situation in which it's a highly competitive world, and so the federal government at some level needs to make decisions for highly competitive dollars based on who's got the best project, which means you have to actually analyze the project to know who's got the best project. So I'm not sure how much of that will change structurally. But unfortunately, another thing that's happened is work expands to fill the available time. And when you try to get into the new starts pipeline now, even if you have an excellent project, what you're told is go to the end of the line. And the end of the line is 8 years from now. And so guess what? How long it takes to do the analysis? 8 years. Because if you get it done in 4, then you sit around doing nothing for 4 years, and the design gets old and stale, and the environmental approvals get stale. So the net result is instead of assigning 25 people to get the thing designed in 20 months, they assign 3 people to get the thing designed in 90 months. So it's unfortunately a bit of a chicken and egg problem. A big part of solving that problem will be substantially more capital dollars going into that program, such that the end of the line is only 3 or 4 years from now, so that if you don't get your engineering and your design and your approvals done in 3 or 4 years, someone's going to skip ahead of you in the line. That will be the single largest motivating factor to get that stuff done faster. We will obviously bear a responsibility to simplify things on the federal end, and that's a source of much ongoing work right now, but there's more than one piece to that puzzle. So I'll end with that, so we have time for questions.
Great. Rocco, your thoughts?
Well, a question came up, a recurring question, which Sean was asking, everybody's asking, what can we the mayors, the people in the room, do? As Sean was leaving, I had a brief conversation with him, and I said, obviously the challenge here is how to get an incredible program like Choice Neighborhoods scaled up with more resources committed and make it a bigger deal than it currently is, because that is an example of what everybody's talking about, of a true collaboration, a holistic approach to a place, and a place-based approach. And what he said was, well, to start with, we have to make the programs that we have work, so that they're, in a sense, demonstration projects, so they really can show people how this works and how it's successful. And I think one of the things that each locality can do, each mayor can do, is to make sure these projects work, number one, that they're successful, that it's all hands on deck to make these into showcase kinds of successes. And then it becomes a challenge to make people aware of them and to highlight them. And there I put on, take off my federal bureaucrat hat and put on my Broadway producer hat. And to some extent, it's a challenge to make people understand the ambition and scope and value of these programs, because there is a sea change going on in the federal government, at least from my perspective, which is what Derek has been prescribing, what he's been presiding over, which is that it really is an all hands on deck collaborative approach, and everything touches everything else. The Department of Transportation is not just about engineering and road building, it's about quality of life and sustainability. A grant was recently made in my hometown for a light rail connection between the arts corridor in Delmar Boulevard and Forest Park, where there's the art museum and the zoo. Well, that's not just a public transportation program, that's also an arts project as well. It touches people in the community in many ways besides just here's transportation from here to there. And we, at the federal level and at the local level with the mayors, have to do a better job of highlighting those kinds of cooperations and their results, I think.
Yeah, I want to pick up on this point because talking about Millennium Park and Mayor Daley, Secretary Donovan said Mayor Daley saw a different kind of math, and Derek, you mentioned this as well. This notion of how do we reframe the benefits of what we're doing. And that's certainly, it has to be one barrier, Mayor, to the National Infrastructure Marshall Plan that you proposed this morning and the accompanying capital budget. So I'm curious, what are the other barriers? If you were going to take this charge and move forward, what would the other barriers be to adopting such a Marshall Plan? Derek, you might be the best to start.
I mean, I think that, making the case for the need is critical. I mean, the elephant in the room, and Solon referred to it, is, the conversation in Washington right now doesn't lend itself to these large types of Marshall plans. Everything is going in the other direction. It's about fiscal distress, cutting. But I think that and even if you look at the budget conversations that we had in FY11, which were very intense, and Secretary Donovan noted how certain things were saved around sustainable development. Roy noted how Tiger, which was on the fence, was saved. It was because the agencies were able to showcase the impact that these programs had and the value that they were bringing to the government, to communities around the country to kind of sustain them. I think we have to do that on a much broader scale, because one of the barriers is, making sure that everything we're talking about here, everything we're trying to push within the administration, we also work with Congress and get Congress pushing in the same direction with us, which sometimes happens, which sometimes doesn't happen. I see Mayor Nutter's I think he's trying to comment as well.
Carol, Derek, I appreciate what you said and the sensitivity with which your person in your position is slightly constrained. I'm not. Political will and common sense. And anyone with any common sense would understand that this is the right thing to do for this country right now, and demonstrating the political will to get it done is really what it's going to take. It's great to showcase programs, if you're really paying attention to what's going on, and if you're not off on some philosophical mission. Investing in America's infrastructure, putting Americans back to work, revitalizing communities, lifting people out of poverty, educating our public, and connecting communities where 80 to 90% of the American population lives. You don't have to be Burnham to figure out that this is the right thing to do. It's just a lot of nonsense going on down in D.C. So, I've said time and time again, mayors could never get away with the kind of nonsense that goes on in Washington. They don't have any responsibility. If someone gets shot, no one is calling a member of Congress. If the trains don't run right, they're not calling a member of Congress. If they can't get to work because they're stuck in traffic, they're not calling a member of Congress. They call us because we're the closest ones to them, and they actually expect that we can do something for them. So they can have all that conversation down there they want and just yap, and talk and run their mouths and play games internally. Unemployment's still too high, city suffering, never enough money, we're cutting jobs and cutting programs and resources and trying to get some stuff done. That's all that matters, because in our world, you either picked up the trash or you didn't. You either moved an abandoned car or you didn't. You either filled a pothole or you didn't and plowed the snow. That's what we do every day, and we know how to get this stuff done.
Manny?
Yeah, sometimes I don't like to go after you, Mike. And here's the irony. When the economy begins to move forward because jobs are being created and people are working, everybody in our state capitals in Washington wants to pat themselves on the back because they created the jobs. And we all know that the jobs are being created at the local level by the mayors in this room and others. So, just to follow up on what Mike was saying, Roy, I don't mean to pick on you, because I think you and Secretary LaHood, by the way, have done a great job at beginning to change the paradigm. But like Mike, I can't sit here and accept a statement that says you better get used to small funded projects. That's just unacceptable, because what happens, as Mike was saying, at the local level is when we have a need, we need to fill it. And we can't go to our constituents and say, get used to small things. Constituents are coming to us and saying, you know, this bridge is falling apart, or, you know, my roads, my kids, it's not safe for my kids to walk on the side. We've got to figure it out. And we have probably, I mean, everyone, all of us, have very, very difficult budget times right now. But notwithstanding that, we have to figure out, how do we do it? Do we go to the private sector? Do we match regional approaches? I mean, it has to get done. And the problem is that in Washington, it is just too simple to say the time isn't right. Well, you know what? The time is never right. The problem with us is that the time is always right, because it is now. It is at the time that the need occurs that we need to fulfill our role and our responsibility and our leadership, because it is at a time like this when leadership is really required. When things are going well and there's plenty of money in the bank, that doesn't show true leadership. It's when things are the way they are today that someone can recognize that we still need to move this country forward. As a matter of fact, there's a greater argument to move the country forward now, because we're in the dumps, than when, you know, things were hopping 5, 10 years ago.
So how do we create the federal, local, private design partnerships that would move us in the direction that you're calling for and that they feel constrained to move us in?
Well, again, I mean, I think a part of that is if you energize folks on the ground in cities. The discussion earlier today was about more direct funding.
Is that your responsibility? I mean, you're saying if you energize people on the ground, is that your responsibility, the mayor's responsibility?
I can energize folks on the ground.
Okay.
When I'm able to show up and fix the South Street Bridge that was falling apart, literally cement going into the Schuylkill River, we made the tough decision to close it for 2 years. We delivered that project not only on budget, but a month early, through the worst winter in the city's history and the hottest summer. We know how to make these things happen. So there were over 1,000 people on that bridge the day it was open. We had a big event, a big ceremony. If we have the resources, we can make these things happen. You can energize people on the ground. We know how to communicate to folks what their federal dollars are going to. It is not filtering through. You send it to the state, it gets spread all over the place because some legislator needs something or the governor needs a vote. So fine, I'll pave a road that will have more animals on it than there'll ever be traffic, and he or she will be happy. So what? So if we had that kind of partnership, more direct relationship, dollars going directly into cities, hold us accountable, we fill out all kinds of paperwork now. So what? I mean, what's another document? I don't care. We will energize people on the ground, and they will see their federal government in action, in work, making things happen on the ground. We'll take that responsibility to communicate that message, but it will not come through a state. And I have great members of Congress, and I invite them to everything. But, you know, they're down there. I talk to folks in a supermarket, barbershop, walking down the street. They know what we do, they know where we are, and if they don't like something, they're not shy about it. There's no shy people in Philadelphia. Right? You give us the resources, we'll give you a return on investment that folks have not seen. So,
and I want to give these guys a chance to respond.
I'll respond to the mayor's point with a practical suggestion. I know Mayor Nutter is currently otherwise engaged, but I gather Mayor Diaz is not currently holding office, so you should run for Congress or run for Senate. And then you can provide that leadership that we need to help get our stuff done.
Thanks, but thanks. I don't want a job in Washington.
We need you.
One thing I would say is that, you know, definitely, as Mayor Nutter said, the mayors are there, they're on the ground, they're in the communities, they can energize. But I don't want to shirk our responsibility too. We can energize too. I mean, our president's pretty good at energizing people. And if we talk about, as someone mentioned in one of the presentations, articulate the vision, articulate what this does, as Mayor Riley said, to change communities, that will help to energize the public to say we need to see Washington delivering more of this. You gave us the slides about the pent-up demand and the structural changes that are taking place, which are making all of this more attractive. We've got to, you know, use that to our advantage to really push this agenda forward. And I think we could probably be doing more at the federal level to be promoting and talking about the critical role that cities and metros are playing in this strategy. That doesn't take away the challenges and some of the constraints, and it's not going to be easy, but I think it's going to take a total team effort from all of us to really get this thing
So,
done.
Carol, we're talking about more bucks. And if the bucks are not coming from the feds, the question is, where do they come from? And I'd suggest there's two sources that are proven sources that we've not been taking advantage of as much as we should. And I'd go back 100 years to the fact that in this country, we had the world's finest rail transit system. And almost all of it was paid for by real estate developers getting their customers to their land. They took their land profits and plowed it into the rail system. And real estate developers and investors are now willing to do that again. Yes, sir. Because we know we need that rail transit in particular to service that pent-up demand that is so evident to us. We're willing to share the upside. That's source number one. Source number two is the folks in this room. And as St. Louis has shown, and as Los Angeles has shown, and 70% of all local tax increases for rail transit over the last 7-8 years have passed in this anti-tax time because of what Mayor Nutter has mentioned, that they trust their local leaderships to, in fact, deliver. So you got two sources. The thing that the feds can help us with is by, A, making that legal, not go through the brain damage that Detroit had to go through as far as the private money going on the Woodward light rail line, which is 100% private money, and have to get an act of Congress to allow private money to go into that rail transit. And number two, use the thing that the federal government has in abundance, at least for right now, is the full faith and credit of the U.S. government and credit enhancement, at least partial credit enhancement, to unlock, like Measure R, like what Mayor Villaraigosa is trying to do in Southern California. Those are the two things the feds can do to let the locals take off.
You want to jump in? Yeah.
Just I want to make sure I'm very, very clear. I absolutely agree with Derek that the president is the leader of the country. Let's put the party stuff aside for a moment. And he does know how to energize folks. I'm only suggesting that from the bottom up, there are more mayors across the United States of America than there are members of Congress and governors combined. That is a force that can be unleashed because, again, in the Conference of Mayors, I don't know the party of 90% of the mayors because it doesn't matter to me. I pick up trash, I fill potholes for a living. That's what I do. You either did it or you didn't do it. There's no Democrat or Republican way of sweeping a street or running a rec center. You either made it happen and people had fun or they didn't. And so I'm just saying that the president and the federal agencies have on the ground a force that can be unleashed, that will not really care about party politics that much. And if we're able to do what we say we can do, I believe that that will actually force some of the members of Congress to do more of the things that the president wants to get done because they will show up. I mean, the hypocrisy that goes on here with folks who show up at ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings for ARA projects that they did not even support the legislation is astounding to me. It is really astounding that people have the audacity to do this kind of stuff. But notwithstanding that, I'd invite them anyway. I'd invite them anyway and take a photo and send it to the newspaper. All right? So there's a force on the ground that could support this kind of activity, and those voices need to be heard.
Are there questions from the audience? I see one moving there, so we'll go to you.
Well, I fully support what Mayor Nutter
just tell us who you are because we can't see you.
I'm sorry, R.T. Ryback from Minneapolis. I fully support what Mayor Nutter said, but I do want to say to other politicians in the room, we should not be expecting or depending on top-down permission from the White House or Washington to have us advocate for this stuff. The Recovery Act was the greenest act in probably the history of this country. Out of all the values that we're talking about, this is the one that has done the best job of crossing all these things together. These guys are getting their butts kicked day after day after day by people who are going on Fox News and ripping it apart. It's our job to not wait for them to do it, but it's our job to go develop the political constituency in our own states. And I agree, Mayor, I've seen those guys at the ribbon cuttings, and it pisses me off. I invite them too, but I go out and organize at election time and tell people exactly who delivered and not. And you guys can't say the politics, we can. There's an election coming up, and we ought to get our butts in gear and develop the political constituency behind all of this, or we're going to lose the progress we've made.
We're going to go here, and then I'll come back over here.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Hosterman.
I'm sorry. I pointed here, and then I'll come up there. Yeah.
I'll yield to her.
Just go.
Okay. Speaking on behalf of a city that is not large, not small, we're about 90,000 people.
Tell us which city.
City of Waukegan. We're located directly between Milwaukee and Chicago. And I don't know if when I say this, I speak for the other mayors of similar sized communities, but here's our problem. We're like a small planet surrounded by two giant planets. And basically money is attracted by the gravity of those two larger bodies. And what we really need is we need to know that our needs and our voices are being heard equally with those large cities. Because if they're not, we are that substance that ties those large cities together. We are the people that go to their baseball games and their football games and to their theaters. And if we're not getting resources, our ability to have an effect on the local economy is badly hampered. And we need to know that our voice is being heard equally and that we are going to get our fair share.
Over here.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Hosterman. I'm the mayor of Pleasanton, California, in my 7th year of service to my community. And I just want to echo Mayor Nutter and Mayor Diaz. You guys, you need to keep your day jobs. You'd make lousy mayors. And I wanted, with all respect, this is not just about city design, but when we actually on the ground implement projects, we need to take into consideration how we develop, how we create higher densities near transit, and when we rip up the streets, especially in some of our older cities, we need to take the opportunity to lay that purple pipe. We need to take the opportunity to address the needs of the neighborhoods that are closest by. We need to take the opportunity to figure out how we're going to attract new businesses, how we're going to deliver quality of life. It's a social justice issue, it's an economic issue, it's an environmental issue, and all those things need to be taken into consideration with every single capital improvement project. And so to hear from the four of you, all of your, sort of gyrations and concerns and discussion about how we communicate with local government, we at local government just have to make it happen. And so to the degree that you can directly help us make it happen, that would be very helpful.
What are you asking them to do? I mean, what is it that they're keeping you from doing or can enable you to do that when you pull up the street and then you're dealing with economic growth, et cetera, all the things you mentioned? What is it there? What are the barriers? What are the opportunities?
So very good. So we have a situation in the state of California where we have SB 375 and the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006, which we have to come into compliance with now, which means we have to figure out what a sustainable community strategy means, and then we have to figure out how we're going to implement it. So we're having that discussion the last couple of months and into the next few months. We're having workshops at the local level throughout the 9 Bay Area counties to engage the public in that discussion. But on the ground, we've got to figure out how we're going to take, for instance, my brand new BART station and develop an opportunity for affordable housing next to that BART station. And so to the degree that you can help us fund those efforts, and again, on the ground, not going through the city, but local government, that would be very, very helpful. So we have the will, we have what it takes, and we're going to piece together transportation monies and housing monies in order to make it work. But if there's an opportunity for the federal government to actually unleash some dollars and help support us in those efforts, again, it's all about the ease. And so that's the kind of support we're looking for. Love the dialogue. Thank you very much for that, but we need money.
Scott, I think you're standing behind her. Is that Scott?
Yeah, hi, Scott Bernstein, Center for Neighborhood Technology. Derek, I want to pick up on your suggestion that President Obama is our leader, and that one of the things that you've heard coming out of this conference that perhaps could be used, and Secretary Lloyd as well, the observation that city design done well is actually delivering more in real time to improve the economy, to reduce dependence on foreign oil, and to get us on the right track to greenhouse gas reduction, than cleaner vehicles, cleaner technology, and cleaner fuels are. You need both of these to make those goals work. And he almost got there in last weekend's address on high gas prices. And I'll bet you with a little nudge and some of the evidence of the support in this room, he could make that connection, which I think a lot of people are looking forward to being made. And in turn, then, perhaps the departments who are also almost there, up at the table, could take the next steps and start to identify some other things that could be done within their authority to support what cities are looking for. And I just wonder if you might comment on that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And no, I mean, that was one of the points I was making earlier, was that one of the things I think from listening to the session that I think the federal government, all of us can do a better job of, is to build into our narrative the importance of city design and how the critical role it plays to advancing all the priorities, winning the future, and the things that the President and our senior leadership talk about. And I do want to just say, and I know, Solon, I think you want to make a point, to some of the other points that were made about giving more resources and those sorts of things, that we do hear you, and we are, I think a lot of the programs that we've put forward under this president and this administration have gone in the direction of trying to make a more direct relationship with cities and with metropolitan regions. But as someone pointed out, we're one actor. If you look at the president's budget proposal for FY12, and you go look at the transportation section that he proposed, this is what he's asking for. The stuff you're talking about is in there, but that's what he requested. Is he going to get what he requested? So we have to make sure that the conversation, and I know you all are doing this incredibly well, and Mayor Ryback, I think, hit on this point very well, but we all have to, the President, all those of us in the administration, work with, we got to all push in this direction, because we can ask for everything under the sun, but that just because we ask for it doesn't necessarily make it so. And so there's more effort, more collaboration between us that has to go into it to get it done.
Carol, I would only suggest that a part of the argument and a part of the debate, I mean, I know I talked about political will and common sense, but also showing how designing well actually gives a good return on investment, that you can actually capitalize on it and use it as a strategy. And so if someone just wants to have maybe a more conservative business argument or debate,
exactly.
then I think that through ensuring, as we talk about, design matters, and this is what the return will be as a result of doing this. It's not just, as the mayor talked about, it wasn't just about the affordable housing development, or it wasn't just about the transit. It was how you put that together in a way that attracts people to that location, that creates and generates economic development, that ultimately cities don't so much build these things on our own. And as Chris pointed out, much of this infrastructure, in many instances, will get built by the private sector. When we look at what the President did in terms of working with the banks, I mean, the banking industry was virtually on the edge of collapse. Yet, in many instances, they still won't unleash the capital that they have sitting on the sidelines. That's a whole different conversation. Or what they say is, well, we'll be glad to lend. We just took our lending guidelines up so high that it's virtually impossible for anyone to meet them. So it's not that we're not lending, it's that these projects are too risky. Well, what better time to make an investment than right now when the country is trying to figure out which way to go. This is the moment. This is the time. And many of our cities are, in fact, ready. They've started changing their zoning codes. They have plans in process. This is the moment to start making those investments, and the private sector really does need to step up and be a partner with cities and with the federal government. If you can put that package together and show how this design is going to result in more economic activity, more economic development, less need for me to temporarily or in a permanent way raise taxes or cut services. Right. I mean, I'm not being Pollyannish about this. This is actually a winning strategy to get you somewhere. Yeah. We just need to cut the noise and the nonsense.
I think your reference to the different kind of math being appealing to a broader political spectrum is, I think, is very important. And I think, you were referencing that. Solon?
Two points real quickly. I wanted to speak to the gentleman from Waukegan for, again, a small case example in the Sustainable Communities Program, which was, and often when we talk about the statistic, folks don't know. So this is the reason why I mention it. Over half of the applicants to that program were from small and rural places. Over half, right? So the fact that these livability principles that unite us struck a chord in lots of different kind of places. So that's one thing. And there are investments, small as they might be, not enough as they might be, but there are investments that are being made. That's the first thing. This notion of partnership on the ground. One thing that you all know on the ground much better than we do, but when we come, we see it, which is the finger pointing that happens in D.C. every which way. There are not enough fingers for as much pointing as there are. But when you get on the ground, part of what is happening when people get an opportunity to innovate is there is some finger pointing, like state, city, county, whoever, but there is much more opportunity for people to say, I got that. That's on me, right? This is my piece. If you do your piece, this is my piece. So the notion of kind of collective responsibility that we're beginning to see on the ground, where people are saying, to Mayor Nutter's point, I don't care what the conversation is on D.C., we know how to fix it here, and we know how to work together to fix it. It's been inspiring to be able to see, and those are the kind of stories that we need to shine light on, to say there are local solutions that have always been there, there's local innovation that's always been there, and there is accountability and responsibility where people are stepping up in a particular, and that's in the fullness of the partnerships that I think folks are saying.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to comment, and then I'm going to go to a couple of questions.
Let me just say this too, because I fully agree with everything that you all have said, particularly you, Derek. But it's also about this, I think. In order to be successful and get where I think all of us want to get, we have to do a better job of messaging. Yeah. And part of the messaging issue, to me, is the American people, although, as Chris mentioned, 70% have voted to increase their taxes at the local level. At the federal level, the examples that they see, and I agree with Mayor Ryback that ARA was an outstanding piece of legislation that we all worked very hard on. But a lot of that money either didn't go into infrastructure and went into social programs, and the money that went into infrastructure in many of our states went to some rural area to build 3 more lanes instead of doing the significant transit projects that people would have seen and said, okay, I see where that ARA money is going, and I see 42 people working there, so I know it's creating jobs. We have a credibility problem when it comes to that. The other thing that I think we have a credibility problem is, unlike at the local level, and Roy, maybe you can address this for me, unlike at the local level, we adopt infrastructure plans. I know that may sound crazy, but we have an infrastructure plan, and we tell the people of our cities, it's going to cost us $500 million to do all this. Everybody knows we don't have it. But we start filling in the gaps, and we start showing people on a priority basis, right? That makes sense. I mean, if you're going to fix your roads, you start with your roads that haven't been touched for 40 years and are, have full potholes and don't work. You start with those. You don't go into an affluent neighborhood and fix a nice road first. And so you explain to people that this is the way we're going to work, and this is how we're going to fix the roads, this is how we're dealing with, storm sewer problems, and through time, we'll get to all of that, and we're going to have a regular cycle of infrastructure upkeep, as opposed to all of a sudden waiting for 30 years, neglecting any infrastructure investment, and then saying, instead of $500 million, I need $2 billion. Because then I really don't have it. And then it's really going to take me forever. And then the people don't believe in what I'm talking about. So I think as we go forward in this partnership, part of what needs to happen is that you need to develop this national plan that isn't developed by politicians necessarily, that makes sense, that people can see and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm willing to pay for that because that makes a sense to me. And then sell that. And I maybe Pollyanna, maybe I'm crazy too, but hell, we all do it at the local level. Right. Yeah. And the people support us. Yes. And in that process, you know, some people may say, no, this project is better than that project, but at the end, you have a plan that the majority of the people have voted for or, you know, approved, right. And then you go implement it.
We have 2 more questions, and then Mayor Riley, because we wouldn't be here without you, we're going to let you have the last word. So let's go to this question.
Mayor John Dickert from Racine, Wisconsin. Isn't this fun, gentlemen? I mean, seriously, isn't this fun? I think the passion that you're hearing today and the things that you've heard from Mayor Nutter and former Mayor Diaz, even though we still think he's mayor, we're going to keep him around for a while, is one of the things I want to talk about is what we haven't really talked about today, is that what we're in essence asking you to do is not only listen to us, because if you leave here and go back to Washington and say, whew, those mayors are upset, we failed. But if you go back to Washington and say, because you are the leaders of your bureaucracies in essence, if you go back to the bureaucrats underneath you and say, we have some work to do, we've succeeded. Because oftentimes what we work through quickly because it's smaller, which you have more difficulty working through because it's so large, is getting those bureaucrats to recognize the fact that they're not there to tell us what we can't do. They're there to work with us when you tell them what to do. And I think that's the leadership that we see, because it's a little easier for us because our governments are smaller. And if you go back with that to Washington, D.C. and say, we've got a variety of issues here and a lot of passion here that are showing us a new direction on how to work through this bureaucratic level to get to a more efficient product, because that's really what we're all about. We're about efficiency. Then we've succeeded. But if we go back and hear, and I've done 25 years at the local, state, and federal level, and consistently hear the bureaucrats say, well, you know, we can't do that. And my response is, no, I'm telling you what to do, and that's what you need to do. So if we can get to that point where we're actually working down and creating that efficiency, we've really succeeded this week. But if we just sit there and listen to them say, that's difficult. Well, listen to these gentlemen, ladies today. Every day for us is difficult. So I'm asking you to go back and allow that leadership to happen, and allow your leadership at the upper levels to push harder on those bureaucrats, to remind them that we have a lot of efficiencies to create. And when we do create those efficiencies, as hard as they may be, we will create a better country, and we know exactly how to do it. So I'm asking you to take on that difficult role, and thanks for being here today.
All right, next, our last comment or question.
I'm Robert Rickard. I'm mayor of Macon, Georgia. And I just wonder what our panelists would think of perhaps an act of Congress that would allow local governments the option of imposing, collecting, and using a tax on motor fuel for transit projects.
Roy?
I will speak to that just out of my knowledge of the system. I don't think that there is anything in federal law that prevents that from happening. There are often things in state laws that prevent that from happening. The federal government actually does impose a motor fuel tax and dedicate it to transit. It is sadly far too small an amount and far too small a share of the total federal tax collection, but we are not the barrier there. But I think there's 30 or 31 states that have either legal or constitutional prohibitions against the use of gasoline tax or motor vehicle registration revenue for anything other than roads. So there are real barriers.
Rocco?
Am I allowed to ask a question into the audience? Is the mayor of Minneapolis still here?
Mayor Ryback? Yeah, right there in the middle.
Okay. I'm old enough to remember Hennepin Avenue before the rehabilitation of the state and the Orpheum and those theaters, and what a difference that made. But Minnesota, we're looking for dedicated revenue streams. Minnesota, to my knowledge, is the only state that has built into its constitution a funding stream for the arts, for parks, for tourism promotion, all, you know, a whole spectrum of activities. How did that come about, and do you think that's replicable in other states across the country as a dedicated, constitutionally sanctioned revenue stream?
Well, two things. First off, it's wonderful to have a dedicated revenue stream for the arts and for outdoors. I happen to believe referendum and initiative government is ruining our democracy, so I kind of go back and forth on that. It took place because, frankly, our governor had taken a very rigid line against investing in any of those issues, and so the constituencies did what they did with transportation when he refused to do that. This is that they put ballot initiatives out and got it done. It has been hugely important in getting it done, but that's about money for an individual project. To me, the real groundbreaking thing would be to take these values of interweaving these things and say, for instance, that we worked through the political process and said, for instance, that 1% of our capital budgets goes for arts, that an element of that. I would rather have art and natural elements woven into existing infrastructure, new infrastructure projects, than having isolated ones that aren't connected to, I think, the deeper values we're talking about here.
Good. I'm going to give you the last word, Mayor Riley.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, the wonderful participants and on the stage and in the audience. I always leave these events like this with my list I put on the back sheet of my yellow pad, things that I can do better at home. And so I'm going back from this with a continued, renewed commitment on my part to do better in the design, the development, and livability of my city. Ideas I've gotten from you and from our panel, and I think that's what we have to all do, because we're all making great progress. Mayors in their cities, our national government, and in some instances, state government, in this issue of making our cities well-designed and livable. But we really are in the early stages of this. So if we leave this meeting, any of us, with not a enhanced commitment to do more and to do better, and whatever level of government it is, and so many things we can do. You know, just in transportation, which is largely a state province, are the books and the regulations and the design standards that are just so outmoded that it's, you know, they're so far behind the times of creating walkable, livable, more intact communities, or you know, whether there could be a additional requirement or at least response. What is the program? What is your plan for utilizing every possible public right-of-way for bike and pedestrian access, whatever and wherever, existing or new? And so I think if we use this meeting to challenge each of us, our cities, our organizations, our respective levels of government, to do more and to do better. And when we get there, then we do better. We've come a long way, but the success of this nation is so inextricably dependent upon robust, creative, livable, energetic, green, sustainable, creative towns and cities. We have so much at stake, and we've got so much to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for... Thank you for your comments, your questions, and please help me thank our panelists.
Thank you so much to Carol Coletta. We're taking a break now. We're going to go to a press conference, and they're going to set lunch down. If you come back here at 12:30, we will have lunch, and we will honor the legacy of Mayor Daley. So please come back, and we will see you all at 12:30.